Have you ever wondered what it might feel like to fall asleep beneath the hush of eternal stars, where time drifts as slowly as the dust between galaxies, and moonlight carries a memory of dreams long forgotten? Then come, set everything else aside, lie down, close your eyes, and let your breath begin to slow. You're safe here. This space, this voice is only for you. Let it wrap around you like a warm blanket. There's no rush, no urgency, just the soft rhythm of your breathing and my calm voice to guide you gently through the cosmos. Tonight, we begin a long drifting journey, a story born not in pages but in stars. The spacecraft Lysithea moved with the grace of a whisper, its gleaming hull kissed by the silver glow of Earth's closest companion, the Moon. It floated effortlessly of tranquility, hovering just beyond the edge of light, where soft shadows danced across cratered plains. Within the gentle hum of its interior, a single traveler watched the surface below, eyes half-lidded with awe and calm. There was no destination, no hurry. The purpose was present. The moon, in all her quiet dignity, offered a mirror to the soul, reflecting not light, but emotion, time, and dreams. As the ship drifted slowly into the lunar night, stars began to shimmer more clearly, revealing a glistening vault above that felt impossibly still. The moon's surface, covered in fine regolith like crushed velvet, stretched far and wide beneath them, painting a tapestry of shadow and light. Mountain ridges stood solemn, casting long, thin shadows that slipped across plains like fingers reaching through time. Occasionally, a glint of ice sparkled within a crater's embrace, silent remnants of comets that had kissed this ancient world in forgotten millennia. The traveler reached out, not to touch the controls, but to feel the moment. They imagined stepping out, boots pressing gently into the soft soil, leaving behind no footprints, only feelings. The moon didn't echo with sound. It echoed with silence, carrying a resonance that could only be felt in the heart. And in that stillness, dreams unfolded like petals. Far below the spacecraft, nestled along the border of Mare Serenitatis, the Earthrise had just begun. Like a precious gem emerging from velvet, Earth crested the horizon, cloaked in gentle blues and greens, surrounded by a haze of soft cloud and light. It hung there, suspended in the black ocean of space, fragile yet radiant, like a lullaby visualized. The traveler inhaled deeply, not out of necessity, but reverence. The moon, silent and solemn, offered the perfect stage for this nightly ballet of planets and stars. And as the ship's interior dimmed, adjusting to the lunar night, a soft tone played through the speakers. An ambient chord, low and sustained, echoing the distant heartbeat of space itself. It was here, beneath the moon's veil, that the traveler let their eyes close fully. The moon's far side slowly revealed itself as the Lysithea drifted deeper into the orbit of silence. This realm, rarely touched by radio waves or Earth's familiar gaze, felt older, more reserved. The terrain below stretched like a weathered scroll, covered in a language of craters, ridges, and shadowed valleys. Each contour held its own quiet tale, worn smooth by time and solitude. Here, silence didn't just fill the space between sounds. It became a presence of its own, wrapping around the spacecraft like a cool mist. The stars above appeared brighter now, no longer softened by reflected light. They hung sharp and steady in the blackness, their glow echoing through the windows in quiet pulses, like distant lighthouses guiding a soul through sleep. Inside, the traveler gently floated in a chamber filled with soft, dim light, set to mimic the hues of lunar dusk. No sharp edges, no corners of brightness, only gradients of silver and sapphire brushed across the walls. A low harmonic hum played in the background, designed not by engineers, but composers who had studied the vibrations of planetary rings and magnetic fields. It wasn't music in the traditional sense. It was a soundscape, like a memory of water, slow and flowing. It created a space not only to observe but to feel. As the moon rotated below, the traveler's eyes met a thin shimmer on the horizon, a glow just beginning to rise like a soft sigh from the land itself, rare and nearly invisible to the naked eye. It occurred when electrostatically charged lunar dust rose into the weak gravity, catching sunlight from just beyond the limb. The result was a subtle veil of glimmering particles that drifted upward, slow and delicate, as if the moon itself were exhaling a breath of dreams. The bloom shimmered in hues of pearl and frost lavender, casting dancing glints across the windows of the Lysithea. It did not burst forth. It did not sparkle like fireworks. Instead, it pulsed gently, a quiet and reverent movement, like ripples through silk. The traveler watched, motionless, eyes wide not with wonder, but with peace. The moon, in her silence, had offered a rare form of beauty, one that spoke not to the mind but to the stillness within. The ship's systems responded to the phenomenon with elegance. Lights dimmed further, drawing attention outward, while the auditory environment shifted to even softer frequencies. The traveler reached toward the observation dome, their hand hovering above the glass. No need to touch, just to be near. They could imagine in this moment, stepping out onto the surface, not to explore, simply to stand in that bloom, arms at their side, eyes closed, feeling the delicate particles swirl around them like a whispered lullaby. The moon didn't speak in words, she spoke in stillness, in glow, in slow motion dances of dust. The moon's rotation continued its slow, silent spin beneath the vessel, and Lysithea adjusted course ever so slightly, its engines barely whispering against the eternal hush of the void. Now the ship passed over a vast depression carved deep into the lunar surface, a crater older than memory, resting within the southern highlands, named Somnium Lacus, the Lake of Dreams. It stretched for miles in every direction, its basin filled not with water but with shadow and moonlight interlaced like threads of silk. From orbit it appeared like a quiet eye watching the stars, soft, round, contemplative. As the ship's lights dimmed in reverence, the traveler pressed their face gently to the glass, peering into that crater with a feeling not of curiosity but connection, as if they had been there before in a dream perhaps, or a quiet moment that memory had folded away. The walls of Somnium Lacus were draped in the softest of grays, tinged in shades of deep ash and ivory as moonlight traced their ridges. Along its inner rim, the rocks cast thin, stretching shadows that flowed like black ink across the dusted floor. At the heart of the crater lay an ancient mound, half-buried, rising slowly from beneath the silt like a sleeping creature wrapped in time. Scientists had once speculated it was the remains of a central uplift, a ghost of the impact that had formed the crater. But tonight, under the quiet lull of lunar twilight, it simply looked like a place where dreams might gather. The air inside the spacecraft was cool and still. Even the ship itself seemed to pause in the presence of the crater, as though paying respect to something sacred, something older than Earth's oceans. Along the rim of the crater, tiny motes of dust began to shimmer in an unhurried spiral, catching the light of the distant sun. Not a storm, not a wind, just motion, like a sigh passing across a still lake. These dust spirals rose and fell with such subtle rhythm that they seemed to move in harmony with breath. In that moment, the traveler closed their eyes, allowing the vision to settle behind their eyelid. In their mind, they walked along the rim of Somnium Lacus, barefoot, the regolith soft beneath their feet, a gentle coolness rising with each step. They imagined the low hum of the moon beneath them, like a lullaby sung through stone and memory. There were no structures, no footprints, no noise, only stillness, the kind that made you feel the edges of your thoughts dissolve. As Lysithea floated above the moon's horizon once more, The glow of Earth had faded behind the curve, leaving the traveler immersed in the deeper night. In this part of the orbit, there were no planetary reflections, only the velvet black of space and the silvery canvas of the moon below. The spacecraft passed over vast, undulating highlands now, where gentle hills flowed like frozen waves, echoing a sea that never was. These were the Terri, the moon's oldest lands, shaped in times before memory, before oceans ever covered Earth. No wind had smoothed them, no water had carved their paths, and yet, from above they moved with a rhythm, a rise and fall that whispered of ancient tides. It was here, over this serene and silent landscape, that the traveler first felt it, not a sound but a sensation, a pulsing, soft and steady, not from the ship or its systems, but from the moon itself. The moon, though barren and quiet, carried within it the memory of being once pulled and pressed by Earth's gravity, stretched like a slow breath. These tidal forces, though invisible to the eye, still echoed faintly through its crust. The ship's sensitive instruments picked them up and translated the vibrations into tones, deep, slow oscillations, like the beating of a distant drum beneath layers of stone. The traveler listened, suspended in low gravity, the sounds washing over them, like soft waves. They felt held, cradled, rocked not by water but by lunar breath, the kind that flowed without ever moving. The ship's internal lighting shifted once more, adapting to the moon's subtle palette: silvered mist, powdered gray, soft beige like worn parchment. No color here screamed, everything whispered. A window opened above, revealing a field of stars directly overhead. They blinked in and out behind thin veils of dust that rose from the moon's surface in tiny flurries, cosmic snow stirred by micro-impacts and solar winds. The traveler's eyes adjusted, not straining but softening, until the stars themselves seemed to pulse in rhythm with the moon's hidden tide. There was no time here, only presence, no direction, only drift. And in that drifting, the traveler felt their thoughts slow to match the world outside. What mattered here was not where one came from, or where one was going, only that they were here within this tide of stillness, floating, breathing, and being. The Lysithea entered the quiet skies above Mare Vaporum, the Sea of Vapors, a place on the moon as poetic as its name suggested. Here, the terrain flattened into a great plain of fine ash-gray regolith, hemmed in by gentle mountains that rose like softened bones from beneath the dust. The traveler looked down at this wide open stretch of the lunar surface, and a feeling like nostalgia settled in their chest. The mare glowed with faint, scattered reflections from the distant stars and the spacecraft's ambient lights, tiny pinpricks that flickered across the plains like lanterns lit for no one by no one. But still they glowed, soft and steady. Floating high above, the traveler adjusted their seat ever so slightly, though gravity barely nudged their weight. The spacecraft's orientation turned, and a panoramic view emerged through the dome-like glass of the observation chamber. The mountains that bordered the Sea of Vapors glimmered with pale light, casting long, quiet shadows that spilled across the floor of the plain like pools of shadow ink. No storm stirred these valleys, no sound echoed from their slope, yet somehow the entire basin seemed alive with motion, not physical but emotional. A gentle restlessness that existed in the stillness itself, like the faint rustle of sheets in the quiet of night. The kind of movement the soul makes when it remembers something forgotten. Slowly, from beneath a distant ridge, a silvery mist began to rise. Not true mist, but a glittering curtain of lunar dust stirred by electrostatic energy and sunlight's gentle pressure. It climbed slowly upward, particle by particle, catching the starlight in its dance. These dust wisps were like ancient prayers lifted from stone. As they rose, the ship's external sensors translated the invisible vibrations around them into soft ambient tones, turning unseen lunar static into calming pulses of sound. The music it created was unlike anything the traveler had heard before. Deep, slow, warm, like the hush between two long breaths. In the center of the Mare Vaprum, those rising lights and sounds converged, forming a quiet scene that felt sacred, a cathedral of stillness beneath the stars. And the traveler, suspended there, felt not alone, but accompanied by silence, by light, by the rhythm of a world that needed no words to speak. The journey carried Lysithea northward now, toward the mountainous expanse known as Montes Archimedes, an ancient sculpted range that rose from the moon's surface like the remnants of a dream frozen in stone. In the darkness of space, these mountains did not loom. They did not threaten, they waited. Time had softened their edges and spread fine blankets of moon dust over their slopes, until each peak resembled a slow breath rising from the lunar plains. From above, they looked like bridges, not between lands, but between moments, between the waking world and the dreaming one. The traveler, floating quietly in the low-light chamber, watched as the shadows played across each ridge, folding into one another like the pages of a story gently turning. Beneath the ship, sunlight was beginning to slip across the high points, catching on crests and cliff edges with the gentlest of touches. These glints sparked momentarily, then disappeared just enough to make the terrain feel alive, but never hurried. The traveler imagined standing atop one of those peaks, the regolith rising beneath their feet, the silence pressing around them like a second sky. In that place, no past was chasing, and no future was calling, only now, only stillness. The mountains themselves seemed to hum, a deep, subsonic resonance, picked up once more by Lysithea's instruments and translated into sound, like the breath of stone made audible. The traveler closed their eyes, allowing the tones to flow through them like slow-moving rivers, smoothing every rough edge in thought and tension alike. As the ship hovered along its orbital arc, a narrow trench came into view below, a subtle depression snaking through the mountain range, filled with shadows so soft they looked like spilled ink. Light grazed the edges of it, catching on suspended dust that shimmered like frost in moonlight. The traveler watched it all unfold from the warmth of the cabin, where soft airflow whispered through vents and a low harmonic tone echoed through the walls. There was no urgency, no speech, just the slow, sacred unfolding of time on a world where nothing where everything mountains, light, silence was allowed to be. The traveler inhaled deeply and exhaled even slower, feeling their body dissolve into the rhythm of the moon, and the moon, in return, offered up her oldest lullabies, folded gently into stone. The moon continued to turn in her quiet ballet, and now Lysithea approached one of her most mysterious landmarks, Plato Crater, a great shadowed bowl resting just above Mare Imbrium, like an ancient vessel left behind by forgotten hands. From above, Plato did not gleam. It absorbed light, drank it in deeply, and held it in silence. The crater's floor was dark and smooth, darker than the lands around it, almost as if the moon herself had gathered her quietest thoughts and tucked them into this place. The traveler leaned closer to the observation window, drawn in not by motion, but by stillness. It was the kind of stillness that echoed even in the absence of sound, the kind that made you feel very small and very heavy. The floor of Plato Crater stretched wide and flat, a plain of blackened stone dusted with ancient dreams. Its edges rose steeply like the rims of a great stone bowl, carved cleanly into the surface. From orbit, the shadows within looked as if they had texture, depth, like the folds of a dark velvet blanket, slowly breathing. The only illumination came from starlight and the faintest kiss of sunlight glancing off distant peaks. But there, in the middle of the crater, something beautiful stirred. Not light, not movement, but a sensation rising from the stone. The instruments aboard Lysithea translated the faintest tremors in the moon's crust into harmonic pulses, a lullaby from within the rock itself. It was the moon remembering, humming quietly to herself in the deep hours of the night. Inside the ship, the ambient lights lowered to near twilight. A soft hue of indigo bathed the traveler, who closed their eyes, letting the soundscape cradle them. It wasn't music in the ordinary sense. It was resonance, tones that wrapped around the mind and body, aligning with breath and heartbeat until everything moved as one. As the traveler listened, they imagined descending slowly into the crater itself, not in haste, not for discovery, just to sit upon its floor and look up at the stars gathered in the black sky above, each one steady, each one serene. There would be no echoes there because nothing would need to be said, just a presence, just the hum. In Plato's stillness, the moon offered a place to rest not only the body but the soul. And in the softness of that crater's dream, the traveler drifted deeper into peace. Now the moon's surface began to curve gently toward the polar latitudes, where sunlight danced with longer shadows and time seemed to stretch between breaths. Lysithea glided silently over the northern highlands, its hull catching starlight like a slow-moving comet. Ahead lay Mare Frigoris, the Sea of Cold, a long, narrow stretch of ancient basalt rock lying still beneath the stars. Unlike the broader lunar seas with their wide, open plains, Mare Frigoris felt hidden, almost secret, as though it waited for only the gentlest of eyes to find it. The traveler, still reclined in the softly lit chamber, drifted closer to sleep with every passing minute, though they remained awake just enough to feel the beauty unfolding outside. As the spacecraft passed into alignment, Earth crested the distant lunar horizon once more, low, glowing blue-green through the velvet of space. It was a quiet kind of light, diffused by distance, yet unmistakably alive. Earthlight spilled gently across the long shadows of Mare Frigoris, revealing tiny glints along the uneven surface, perhaps flecks of ice caught in deep craters, or ancient minerals turned to glass by eons of micrometeorites. The landscape below looked like a painting half-remembered from a dream. Long ridges like ripples in frozen silk, soft slopes dusted with silver, and a stillness so deep it reached inside the traveler and calmed even the smallest thought. Earth shimmered above it all, like a watchful lantern hung just beyond reach. In that moment, Lysithea slowed its glide to a near hover. A low resonance played through the cabin, rich, velvety tones drawn from Earth's electromagnetic fields, layered with the moon's own ancient rhythms. The traveler listened, feeling as though they stood between two sleeping giants, each one dreaming in rhythm with the other. Earth hummed with soft energy, while the moon pulsed with memory. And in between, silence, delicate as snowfall. The traveler allowed themselves to sink deeper into that space, their body weightless, their breath long and quiet. Mare Frigoris passed beneath them like a lullaby in stone cold, yes, but comforting. The kind of cold that wrapped around you like a soft blanket, protecting the quiet inside. And in the embrace of Earthlight and Lunar Stillness, the traveler surrendered to rest, as the stars blinked slowly above. The moon had turned once more beneath Lysithea, and now a gentle transition began to unfold outside the vessel. The long lunar night was slowly, almost imperceptibly, giving way to twilight. But unlike the vibrant bursts of sunrise on Earth, lunar dawn arrived with the stillness of glass, fragile, clear, and silent. The terminator, that thin line where night yields to day, drifted across the surface like a whispered thought. It passed over rolling hills and deep plains, waking the dust particle by particle in a slow bloom of silver blue. The traveler, half dreaming, opened their eyes to see the light rise across the horizon. Not abruptly, not with flare, but like a tide gently returning to a shoreline that had waited an eternity. Outside, the regolith sparkled faintly, catching the first touches of sunlight in fine threads, like morning frost laced across an ancient field. Shadows receded slowly, folding backward into the rocks as if retreating under a soft blanket of light. The moon's texture began to shift, no longer hidden in blackness, but not yet fully seen. In this in-between world, the lunar surface felt more alive than ever. A low-frequency sound filtered into the cabin, generated from solar wind brushing against the moon's subtle magnetic weight. It wasn't music, not quite, but it pulsed gently, like distant breath. The ship's interior responded in kind, its lighting adjusted to a faint peach hue, barely brighter than the darkness that had preceded it. The traveler remained still, allowing the light and sound to wash over them. It was a moment not meant for movement, but for receiving, as if the moon was offering something delicate, something sacred. From their place in the observation chamber, they watched sunlight touch a cluster of distant domes, low, rounded hills formed by ancient volcanic activity. These domes, rarely noticed, glowed faintly now in the softening dark. They looked like resting shapes under a smooth, star-speckled quilt, their curves gentle, unbroken. No rush, no story, no urgency, just present. And above them, the stars began to thin, slowly fading behind the arrival of dawn's hush. The moon was waking, but not fully, not all at once. It was a waking that took its time, that honored stillness. And in that glassy silence, the traveler exhaled, their breath long and slow, floating with the dawn. As Lysithea continued its unhurried orbit, it came once again over familiar ground, the Tranquillitatis Basin, also known as the Sea of Tranquility. But this time, it was not as it had been earlier beneath the night. Now the sun had fully risen across the plain, painting every ridge, ripple, and crater in soft gold. There was no glare here, no harsh brilliance. The light on the moon moved differently, spilling across the landscape like warm tea across silk, slow, graceful, with nothing to disturb its flow. From above, the basin stretched out wide and even, like a great breath drawn into the body of the moon, held there for 1,000 years. The traveler, rousing from the edge of dreams, found themselves watching it again as if for the first time. From the observation dome, the Sea of Tranquility shimmered not with water, but with history. Its floor was smooth and ancient, like parchment worn by the hands of time. Across it were tiny glints, glass beads formed by ancient lunar fires, long since cooled, yet still catching light like stardust. The spacecraft's sensors displayed no movement, no change, yet the basin below felt alive with memory. The traveler closed their eyes and imagined drifting down, slowly, gently, as if their very presence could float upon the dust. They saw themselves walking the plains with weightless steps, each footprint a whisper, each breath an offering to the quiet. Overhead, a soft ambient tone filtered through the ship, a harmony drawn from the moon's subtle seismic rhythms, faint tremors echoing from deep within her crust. It was like listening to her sleep. Along the edge of the basin, a range of delicate hills rolled in and out of shadow, sculpted by sunlight in long curving strokes. They weren't high, they weren't sharp, they were peaceful, softened by time and solitude. The traveler imagined lying along one of those gentle slopes, looking up at the earth now high in the sky, a marble, serene and distant, glowing in full. The moon offered no noise to compete, no wind to interrupt, just stillness, just warmth. Lysithea floated in synchrony, its systems humming like a lullaby composed from silence itself. Here, above the tranquil basin, even the passage of time seemed to forget itself, and the traveler, nestled in softness, let themselves drift once more into the tide of rest, carried not by motion, but by stillness too deep for word. As the ship Lysithea arced gracefully out of Mare Tranquillitatis, it approached the ancient lunar highlands, where the moon's most rugged terrain unfolded like a timeless stone tapestry. These lands, older than the lunar seas, rose and fell in intricate patterns, sharp ridges softened by eons, clustered hills worn smooth by micrometeorites, and plains scattered with the quiet scars of celestial collisions. Yet even here, where the surface bore the weight of immense age, there was no harshness, The light, now fully spilled across this side of the moon, flowed into every fold and valley like a patient stream. And in the wake of that light, the traveler felt their breath lengthen once again, sinking to a rhythm slower than thought. The ship dimmed its interior to match, shadows stretching softly across the curved walls like the inside of a lantern. As Lysithea hovered above the ridges, the traveler observed a phenomenon rare even in these still regions: veins of light, created when sunlight poured through narrow valleys, channeling into golden threads that gleamed across the dust. These weren't beams that pierced the dark, but trails laid down gently over the landscape as if by an invisible hand. They flickered and wavered with the slightest motion of lunar dust in the thin exosphere, and though there was no wind, the very presence of light stirred the terrain as though waking it from a long, deep slumber. The traveler imagined walking within one of those light veins, following it as it snaked through the highlands, not searching, just following, letting it guide them without question or destination. Beneath them, as the ship passed over a cluster of highland domes, rounded hills like sleeping giants, the onboard systems interpreted the moon's natural vibrations into sound once again. This time, the tones were faint and airy, almost chime-like, as if the stone itself was singing in its sleep. They wove with the faint music of cosmic background radiation, barely audible but deeply felt, like the flutter of wings behind a dream. The traveler rested deeper into their seat, the light dim, the sound tender, and the view outside vast and ageless. Here, above the moon's oldest bones, even thoughts became soft, memories floated in and out like feathers on still air, and the boundary between self and sky grew thin. Lysithea drifted on, silent and sure, carrying its lone passenger through the golden quiet of space. As Lysithea slipped across the moon's southern skies, its orbit carried it toward one of the most majestic and ancient formations on the lunar surface. Clavius Crater. Vast and dignified, it rested like a crown among the highland shadows, its floor a basin of dust and silence, its walls standing tall in the frozen hush of time. The traveler had seen many wonders on this journey: veils of light, dust blooms, shadowed seas, but something about Clavius held a weight not of mass but of meaning. It was old, even by lunar standard, a deep scar from a time when the moon was young and chaos reigned in the solar system, but one that had healed with patience. From above it appeared almost solemn, not broken, resilient. Clavius spanned over 200 kilometers. Its walls stretched in soft arcs, cradling the interior like a great bowl carved into silver stone. As Lysithea descended into a lower observational orbit, the angle revealed the crater's most famous feature: its inner chain of craters lined up like footsteps in time, each one smaller than the last, receding into the basin like echoes of some ancient rhythm. The traveler hovered near the curved glass of the observation dome, eyes wide with soft awe. Below, shadows pooled into the lower recesses of the crater floor, while its ridged edges caught the warm, diffuse glow of a sun not quite overhead. The light draped over everything like silk, fluid, quiet, slow, the kind of light that asked not to be seen but to be felt. Within the silent walls of Clavius, something gentle stirred, not movement but an atmosphere, a sensation. Thin columns of dust rose faintly from some of the smaller craters, kicked up perhaps by distant impacts or lingering electrostatic charge. These plumes didn't rise like smoke or fog. They floated, climbing with no urgency into the thin exosphere, particles barely held by the moon's gravity. As they ascended, they caught the grazing light and refracted it softly, creating a celestial haze, like the finest veil drifting through air that didn't exist. It shimmered without sparkle, glowed without glare. The ship's instruments registered these rising trails as anomalies, but the traveler thought of them more as dreams, slowly lifting from the surface to rejoin the stars above. Inside Lysithea, the environmental tones shifted to match the crater's solemn grace. The ambient soundscape moved into deeper harmonic ranges, mimicking the moon's crustal frequencies. These were tones you didn't hear so much as remember. Soft droning chords, like the echoes of ancient bells rung underwater, followed by low, warm pulses that moved through the floor panels like distant heartbeats. It was sound with no urgency, music that existed only to hold space. The traveler rested deeper into the observation couch, limbs relaxed, eyelids growing heavier. Here, in the embrace of Clavius' quiet enormity, there was nothing to do but breathe and be. As the ship drifted slowly across the crater, the play of light revealed textures long hidden, cracks like rivers across the stone, collapsed walls filled with fine silt, and patches of darkened rock, glassed over from impacts that had occurred before humans had even learned to build fire. Every mark, every shadow told a story, not of chaos but of endurance. These formations had remained untouched for billions of years. No storms had swept them away, no tides had shifted them. Only time and stillness and the soft hand of gravity. The traveler imagined walking down there, alone but never lonely, leaving slow footprints in the dust that might remain for eternity, and in doing so becoming part of the moon's quiet memory. At the far side of Clavius, where its outer wall opened into another vast plain, the traveler noticed a curious glint, not metallic, nothing artificial but a shimmer, almost like frost. A closer view revealed fine microcrystals, formed from the cooling of ancient lava flows, now polished by solar wind and radiation into something smooth, reflective. These crystals, no larger than grains of sand, were scattered across the slope, catching the light in a soft scat. From above they looked like a frozen sea of stars, poured out over the rim and forgotten there. Lysithea's external sensors captured the diffraction patterns, transforming them into visible overlays that danced across the glass of the dome. Starbursts in slow motion, drifting from one end of the traveler's view to the other. The ship didn't just show the moon, it sang. It painted it in light and tone and shadow, a lullaby in every layer. Clavius slowly began to fall away beneath them, the ship rising gently on its orbital arc once more. The view widened, revealing the surrounding highlands, rolling terrain that stretched into soft ridges, touched faintly by the thinning lunar atmosphere and the morning light. The traveler lingered by the window, watching the crater grow smaller yet feeling no distance. Clavius had marked something within them, not a destination but a threshold, a deepening into stillness, a new place where thoughts no longer reached, and only feeling remained. They pressed a hand lightly to the glass, not to touch, but to be closer, as if some part of them had been left behind, resting in the dust below like a fragment of a dream left too long in sleep. Behind them, soft lights moved across the chamber walls, animated waveforms of lunar vibrations, pulsing gently in patterns that mirrored the rise and fall of the terrain below. The tones continued, deeper now, almost subsonic, the kind of sound that filled the room without ever needing to rise, the kind of sound that settled into the spaces between thoughts and softened even the most subtle tensions. The traveler took a deep breath, long and even, and exhaled slowly. Their body now barely felt like a separate thing, more an extension of the ship, the moon, the quiet. Lysithea drifted on, graceful and assured, carrying its passenger not toward adventure but toward peace. And beneath them the moon dreamed still. The crater vanished beyond the limb of the horizon, and the stars returned to view, scattered like scattered beads across the velvet dome of night. Lysithea continued forward, into a part of orbit the traveler had not yet seen. The ship's lighting system began to dim further, moving into deep blues and silvers, mimicking the cold, elegant calm of lunar midnight. The journey was not ending, it was deepening. And with every rotation, every pass above ancient land, the traveler slipped a little further into the rhythm of space, no longer a visitor, but a listener, a dreamer among stars. The moon's gentle curve carried Lysithea farther toward its most secret places, those hidden pockets of eternal shadow near the lunar South Pole. Down here, where sunlight rarely treads, lay craters so deep and ancient they had never once seen the touch of day. These were the permanently shadowed regions, cloaked in an unbroken darkness for billions of years. And yet they were not empty. Within those silences, scientists had long suspected, water ice had gathered, tiny frozen fragments cradled in dust and stone, glimmering faintly when caught in the glow of instruments and distant starlight. But Lysithea didn't come to measure or disturb, it came to listen. The traveler sat in perfect stillness as the ship's orbit dipped low, tracing the darkened ridgelines like fingers over a sleeping face. The outside world grew dim again, not with nightfall, but with depth. The shadows here were thick, layered not just with darkness, but with the feeling of time stretching endlessly backward. It was the kind of darkness that didn't frighten, it calmed, it embraced. Within it, the stars above grew brighter, their cold fires unhindered by glare. The moon's jagged edges framed them like a crown of ice. In this cold, quiet place, the traveler felt as though they had passed beyond the realm of time entirely. Nothing rushed here. Even the dust particles seemed to move with intention, gliding upward on faint electrostatic fields, dancing in invisible arcs like drifting embers. A soft hum began to ripple through the ship's interior, a new harmony, lower than before, textured and echoing like sound through stone. These weren't just ambient tones, they were real-time translations of seismic murmurs beneath the lunar crust, shifts so small that only machines could perceive them. But when heard this way, through soft vibrations that pulsed beneath the traveler's feet and echoed in gentle tones through the air, they became something more. They were the breath of the moon. And here, above the frozen shadows, that breath was slow and steady. The ship moved quietly, following a predetermined arc, and as it passed over a crater rim, the sensors revealed what no eye could truly see. A glimmer. There, tucked in the curve of darkness, a pale sheen of lunar ice had caught a starlit angle just right. It wasn't brilliant, not obvious, but to the traveler watching through the filtered viewport, it was a marvel. A patch of ancient frost, unbothered for eons, now shining with a quiet pride. No ripples of wind marred its surface, no creatures stirred its peace. It simply was a presence, a memory frozen into matter. The ice reflected light in a soft glow, almost bluish, casting long and delicate shadows along the inside of the crater's bowl. Lysithea paused in orbit for several long minutes, hovering in reverent stillness. The ship's environmental systems lowered in sound, letting the soft background pulse of lunar rhythms rise to the surface. It was like a heartbeat beneath a frozen lake, barely there, but undeniably alive. Inside the chamber, the traveler turned down the interior lights to the lowest setting, allowing their eyes to adjust to the deep blues and silvers of the polar sky. Above, Earth was nowhere to be seen, hidden behind the curvature of the moon, but the stars stood in full procession. They stretched so clearly across the sky that they felt close enough to touch, suspended in the void like crystal drops on silk. The ship's gentle hum combined with the sights outside to create a moment suspended in stillness. There was no distinction now between ship and sky, traveler and view. All things felt unified by silence, woven together in a tapestry of peace. The moon didn't ask questions, she only invited stillness, and the traveler had long since accepted. Then something unexpected occurred, not loud, not disruptive. A shimmer, a wave, a soft ripple in the light near the crater's edge, as if a sheet of frost had shifted just slightly under the pressure of time. The motion stirred a thin cloud of micro-ice into the exosphere, and for a brief moment, the air, though technically airless, glowed with dancing fragments. They caught the light, twinkling not like stars but like tiny prayers rising upward. The traveler held their breath, not out of fear, but awe. There was no spectacle, no drama, just a faint ballet of light and stillness. One the moon performed not for audience but for herself, and the traveler, by grace of quietness, had been allowed to witness it. The onboard systems translated the event into a tonal cascade, high crystalline notes like falling snow, followed by long echoing chords that faded into the deep hum beneath. It was music shaped from silence, composed by motion too slow to see, by energies too faint to feel. Yet it soothed something deep within the traveler. The ice below was untouched, undisturbed, and already beginning to settle again, the shimmer fading, the frost resuming its quiet vigil. A quiet voice within the ship spoke, not words but a soft tone rising and falling 3 times in sequence. It was Lysithea's signal for stillness, its way of saying, "We are at peace." With the ship continuing its arc, the shadows below deepened once more, and the frost withdrew into darkness, as though it had never been seen. But the impression it left lingered, not a memory, but a feeling. The traveler reclined further, pulling the soft thermal blanket around their body, though they were warm already. The chamber lights gently pulsed in blue, echoing the rhythm of the ship's motion. The stars turned slowly above them, and a new sound began to form in the background, like a slow tide washing over glass. A sound designed not to stir, but to lull. The sound of space breathing, the sound of nothing, becoming everything. Lysithea began a long, gentle curve toward the terminator line again. Soon it would re-enter the twilight edge between darkness and light, but for now, it drifted above the deepest part of the lunar night, above ice that had never melted, craters that had never seen a dawn, and silence that had never been broken. In this realm, time was not measured in seconds or days, but in patience, in presence, in the hush between heartbeats. The traveler's eyes, half-lidded, blinked slowly, not with sleep, but with peace. There was no need for dreams here. The moon was already dreaming, and Lysithea was part of her lullaby. There was only the motionless drift of stars, the slow hum of memory, and the echo of frost in the dark. As Lysithea gently crested the moon's horizon once more, it entered the vast, soft space where darkness begins to lift, where the night does not end abruptly, but dissolves like smoke into the hush of early light. This was the Terminator Zone, the ever-moving edge between lunar night and day, and it flowed across the landscape in silent procession, painting stone and dust with ever-deepening hues of silver and blue. Unlike on Earth, where dawn arrives with birdsong and breeze, the moon welcomed light in the slowest of ways. The traveler, now wrapped in a blanket of quiet comfort, watched through the curved glass of the observation dome as that light returned, not with brilliance, but with memory. They had long since lost any sense of time. That was the nature of the moon. It asked you not to measure, not to chase hours or minutes, but to be within each moment as it unfolded like mist. And here, above the Terminator, that invitation became irresistible. Shadows stretched for miles, cast from even the smallest stones as the low sun skimmed the surface from the far side of the world. These shadows moved slowly, so slowly that they felt like living things, migrating not with purpose, but with grace. They clung to ridges and ridgelines, painting deep indigo shapes that moved like flowing ink across parchment. Light followed them in waves, wrapping each stone in soft halo-like glows. The moon's dust played a role here too. Known as regolith, it was fine as ash and sharp as glass, worn down by endless bombardment and never smoothed by wind or water. Yet here, in the low light, it glittered with light. The traveler could see tiny motes rising, lifted not by breath or breeze, but by electrostatic levitation. A strange and beautiful process, caused by the friction between day and night. As light touched the surface, it awakened charges in the dust grain. They responded by dancing, rising into the airless space in soft arcs and drifting gently before falling again in silence. These dust fountains, as scientists once called them, moved with a rhythm that felt more like music than physics. And indeed, the ship knew that. Lysithea translated the subtle movements into sound, as it had done again and again during the journey. Not to simulate music, but to reveal what already existed. The tones were delicate, like bells wrapped in velvet. There were no melodies, only layers, high crystalline pulses to represent the light dust rising, deeper hums for the grains that fell, and beneath it all, the ever-present resonance of the moon itself, a slow, warm vibration, like a lullaby sung beneath layers of stone. The traveler's breath slowed again, matching the rhythm unconsciously, in and out, in and out. The ship floated as if asleep, perfectly still, a dream cradled in the arms of twilight. Below, the moon's landscape became more vivid with every minute, not in color, but in clarity. The low-angle sunlight revealed every tiny dip and rise in the terrain. A crater the size of a teacup cast a shadow the length of a building. A rock no taller than a person became a spire of darkness across the plain. The traveler imagined walking there, not in haste, not to explore or claim, but to witness, to follow their own elongated shadow as it moved alongside them. They imagined sitting cross-legged in the dust, letting it rise around them like silver mist, and watching as the sun slowly peeled the shadows away. What a gift, they thought. Not just to see light, but to see where it meets silence. Then came a flick, a brief glint above the surface, small, slow, and curved like the tail of a falling star. It wasn't a meteor, nor space debris. It was a grain of lunar dust, lifted high into orbit by some subtle force, catching the sunlight at just the right angle to become, for a moment, a shining speck in the black, and then another, and another. Soon the space just above the surface filled with drifting flecks of illuminated dust, each one no larger than a seed, but each glowing softly, moving in slow spirals. They rose like glowing pollen in a field no eye had ever seen. Not chaotic, not random, dance. The traveler leaned forward slightly, mesmerized. Their reflection in the dome glass faded beneath the strength of the moment. They could almost feel those grains brushing past, like snowflakes without cold. The ship captured the light patterns and projected them inward, letting them float across the observation chamber in slow motion. Pale specks of silver light drifted through the cabin, twirling gently, guided by unseen tides, and with them came a new sound, one that had never been heard on Earth. It was composed of long pauses and fragile tones, built from the speed, angle, and altitude of the dust as it moved through space. A music shaped by physics, but delivered as emotion. The traveler's eyes fluttered closed, not from tiredness, but peace. The sounds, the lights, the textures of shadow. They wove around them like layers of a dream too beautiful to wake from. This was what the moon offered. Not grandeur, not spectacle, but the quiet reminder that stillness could hold more wonder than movement ever could. That silence could sing, and dust could dance, and light could remember. And here in the ship's gentle cradle, the traveler floated in it all, untethered, unburdened. They imagined reaching a hand out into the dust outside, feeling its lightness pass through their fingers, knowing it had never been touched by another. They imagined lying back against the regolith, staring up at the stars, letting the earth rise come slowly, knowing it would arrive not to interrupt, but to join the hush. The moon was not a place of isolation. It was a place of union, a place where everything felt interconnected through quiet rhythm, shared light, and patient time. Lysithea began its gentle ascent from the twilight zone, rising slowly on orbital drift, its engines quiet and efficient, disturbing nothing. The Terminator line passed below, continuing its eternal migration across the moon's face, leaving behind 1,000 dancing motes, and the slow rise of gold upon silver. The traveler remained still, their senses open, not needing to grasp the moment. The moon never asked to be understood, only to be accompanied. Above them, the stars remained, endless and tender, and below, the moon continued her dreaming, casting soft shadows, lifting dust like breath, and welcoming the return of a long, slow dawn. The orbit of Lysithea carried it into another slow arc, one that gradually revealed the Earth once more. Pale and whole, Earth hung in the blackness like a lantern of clouds and oceans, glowing softly, yet powerfully, casting its gentle light across the face of the moon. Unlike the stark brilliance of direct sunlight, Earthlight had a different kind of presence. It was indirect, muted, cooler in tone, but rich with detail. It illuminated the lunar surface not with fire, but with memory. It was the kind of light that revealed not just form but story. A light that whispered, "You've been here before, and you're safe." The traveler leaned closer to the observation dome, wrapped in silence and warmth. They had watched Earth rise before, but not like this. Now it rose slow and sovereign over the jagged edge of a mountain ridge, not with drama, but with grace. There was no music for this moment, just the slow hum of the ship, and the subtle flicker of monitors tracking the celestial alignment. Earth's light reached across the plains and craters, and as it spread, it transformed the moon into something different, not cold or lonely, but familiar. With Earthlight, the moon didn't feel separate. It felt like a sister caught in reflection. Below, the lunar surface responded. The sea of serenity, now lying directly beneath Lysithea, bathed in the silver glow. No hard shadows, no deep contrasts, just a soft monochrome field of ancient volcanic plains stretching to the horizon. The traveler could see the rippling edges where old lava flows had hardened into wave-like ridges, their curves catching Earthlight like the folds of a satin quilt. Small pockmarked craters dotted the terrain, and every edge shimmered with an inner glow, not from within the moon, but from the reflection of Earth, a borrowed light that carried oceans and thunder clouds, forests and fireflies, now stretching gently across the dust of another world. Lysithea rotated slowly, tilting its viewing chamber for a better angle, revealing the Earth in its full, luminous bloom. The travelers stared at it, fragile and full. A quiet ache tugged at their chest, not from longing but from wonder. That floating marble held every forest, every city, every sea, every childhood memory, every whispered wish, every language, every song. And yet here, from this calm place above the moon, it looked like a dream, a place more imagined than remembered. The traveler didn't feel far from it. They felt wrapped in it, as if Earth's presence reached out across the void to say, "You're not alone." A new layer of sound entered the chamber, low and harmonic, with slow swells that mirrored the curvature of Earth's glow. This was Lysithea's way of interpreting the balance between Earth's albedo and the moon's surface composition. Each mineral field, each cluster of regolith responded differently to Earthlight, and the ship read it like a score, transforming geological readings into waves of sound. The result was a silent choir, building gently, voice by voice. No lyrics, no sharp notes, just a steady ascension of warmth. The traveler reclined deeper, feeling the music not as entertainment, but as atmosphere. It was not there to be noted. It was there to support the noticing, to hold space for emotion, not to guide it. As Earthlight stretched farther across the lunar surface, it reached into deep valleys, glinting off the inside edges of long-forgotten craters. One, especially, caught the traveler's gaze, a shallow depression near the edge of Mare Serenitatis. Inside, a collection of small rocks cast shadows that looked like a ring. It wasn't a perfect circle, but something about the symmetry felt meaningful. The ring caught the light at just the right angle, and for a moment, it gleamed like a symbol drawn into stone by unseen hands. The traveler imagined lying there, curled within that circle, protected by nothing but shadow and sky. The thought filled them with calm, not the absence of thought, but the presence of trust. And then the stars returned in full. As Lysithea completed its slow roll, the night sky opened above again, revealing a deep sea of constellation. Earth hung low now, casting its glow upward like a lantern floating on dark water. The moon beneath remained still, undisturbed. There was no atmosphere here to ripple, no wind to carry sand, no cloud to hide the stars. Everything stayed as it was, unmoving yet never static, silent yet full of sound. The traveler closed their eyes for a moment, letting the scene remain behind their eyelids. The weightlessness of the cabin gave them the sensation of drifting, not as a passenger on a ship, but as part of the ship itself, or part of space. The boundary between observer and observed had blurred long ago. They weren't looking out at the moon anymore. They were within it, wrapped in its silence, held in its rhythm, floating not above, but among the dust, the shadows, and as the choir of Earthlight swelled just a little, growing not in volume but in richness, the traveler imagined the moon listening to the sounds of its sister's reflection, to the breath of a lone ship gliding across its orbit, to the slow, quiet heartbeat of its own frozen crust. And maybe, just maybe, the moon was dreaming as well. The ship's lights dimmed further, sensing the traveler's descent into stillness. Only the barest glow remained, blue and silver, mirroring the light outside. The stars flickered overhead, and the soundscape softened to a deep, rolling hum, the kind of sound that doesn't fill a room but empties it, leaving space for breath, for sleep, for thought to settle. The traveler let out a long, even breath. They were not tired, exactly, but they were ready to drift, not just into sleep, but into something deeper, something soft, a waking sleep, a dreaming awareness. The earth remained there in the sky, constant, glowing, quiet, and the moon in her silence continued to cradle the dreamer. Above the silvered curve of the moon, Lysithea drifted into a sector long overlooked, a transitional band where the smooth seas of Mare Imbrium slowly gave way to the fractured crust and elevated ridges of the Western Highlands. This was not a place known for its beauty in the eyes of explorers. No towering crater walls or sweeping maria stretched across this terrain. Instead, it was quiet, subtle, weathered. But to the traveler, this was the most sacred space of all. A region known to Lysithea's internal mapping system as the Arch of Dust and Time. There was no literal arch, no towering monument carved from stone. The name came from the orbital maps where, from a certain height, a crescent-shaped ridge cut across the moon, like the outline of an ancient doorway. Its edges barely perceptible under normal light, but in the slanted shine of lunar twilight, that gentle curve revealed itself as a soft silver thread draped over stone. This was a natural formation born from epochs of slow crustal bending. Its shape subtle, and its significance invisible to anyone not willing to sit in stillness long enough to feel it. Lysithea slowed its orbital glide, not because it had to, because it wanted to honor the pause. The traveler sat cross-legged now, weightless in their seat, floating softly within the ambient cradle of the observation chamber. Light was faint in this quadrant, filtered through the thin dust halo that often lingered near the lunar western rim. These were the remnants of ancient impacts, shaken loose from centuries of tiny collisions and the relentless whisper of solar winds. Now they hung in the void like frozen fog, and Earthlight scattered through them in intricate pattern. To the human eye, it looked as though a transparent veil had been draped over the moon itself. Stars blinked behind it, diffused and dreamy. Even time, it seemed, passed more softly here. As Lysithea passed above the ridge, the traveler noticed something unusual. A long, narrow shadow arc, projected onto the dust far below. The arc didn't belong to the moon, and it didn't quite belong to the It was the Earth's light, refracted just so, wrapping around the dust in a perfect bow, curved like an eyelash, delicate as thread. A phenomenon born from angle, reflection, and chance. And in that moment, it felt like a gateway, a symbolic doorway not to another place, but to a feeling, a way of seeing the moon, not as a destination, but as an old friend holding out her hand in slow greeting. The ship's ambient systems responded. A new tone entered the chamber, one lower than those before, with a resonance like deep chimes echoing through a quiet canyon. It wasn't music in any traditional sense, more a presence, a vibration that stirred the walls, the seat, even the traveler's own chest, as if the moon itself had opened a voice buried deep in its bedrock. The sound was patient, slow, circular. It moved in spirals rather than progressions, unfurling in long, thoughtful waves. The traveler leaned back, allowing their body to follow the rhythm, their breath matching the cycle, without effort. Every exhale became a falling mote of dust, every inhale, a rising shimmer of light. Far below, the soft ridge of the arch seemed to ripple, not truly moving, but shifting as shadows passed across its edge. The dust there had not been disturbed in eons. It bore the marks of time, not of touch. Faint trails of micrometeorites crisscrossed the terrain, like scribbles etched by the universe itself in a language long forgotten. The traveler imagined walking there, no suit, no helmet, just present. Each footstep would send a slow puff of silver dust into the air, rising around their ankles and drifting up like incense smoke. In that imagined space, the arch stood not as stone, but as a portal to a moment of pure quiet, a threshold into a place where thinking stopped and feeling began. The stars continued to burn overhead, steady and ancient. Behind the soft veil of lunar dust, they pulsed like breath held and slowly released. Each point of light was a window, a lighthouse, a heartbeat. The ship floated without motion now, caught in that quiet pause between orbits, letting gravity do the work. The traveler looked out, not for answers but for the shape of calm. They found it in the way the dust curled through the air, in the way the shadows stretched across the moon's skin like slow water, in the soundless hush of space that rang louder than any storm. A new projection appeared on the dome glass, a delicate overlay showing the estimated age of the landscape below. Lysithea used its scans to create a visual timeline, not in numbers or maps, but in colors. Warm amber tones represented young terrain. Soft blues marked the oldest places. Beneath them, the arch of dust and time shimmered in the deepest indigo the system could render. The traveler gazed at it in reverence. This place was ancient, far older than any human structure, older than Earth's great forests and rivers. Yet it had endured not through strength, but through stillness, through patience, through another layer of sound entered the chamber, barely a whisper, a wind that never existed, woven from frequencies captured by solar particles, striking the moon's surface. The sound resembled the breath of air, moving through pine trees, except there were no trees here, just the illusion of motion, wrapped in a music of memory. It swept gently from one side of the ship to the other, creating the sensation of drifting through a great cathedral made of light and dust. The traveler closed their eyes, not to sleep, but to feel the shape of that sound in the dark behind their eyelids. Then a soft pulse beneath them, barely felt, but undeniably there. A microquake, likely, or the shudder of a distant impact far across the surface. The moon had stirred in her slumber briefly, and with that stirring came a wave of warmth through the ship, as though it too had registered the moon's quiet movement. The lights shifted to a dim gold, the tones deepened into gentle low. The traveler smiled faintly, drifting once again, not through space, but through the folds of rest, through the space between words, through the dust of time. Lysithea began its quiet ascent once more, rising from the arch and continuing its gentle path around the moon's curve. The veil of dust slowly cleared as the ship passed above the limb, revealing a clearer sky, sharp stars and the long arc of the lunar horizon stretching like a promise. Below, the arch faded into shadow once more. The memory of it, however, lingered in the traveler's chest, soft, curved, eternal. The next phase of Lysithea's orbit carried the vessel over one of the moon's most serene and quiet wonders, the Valles Alpes, or the Alpine Valley, a long, narrow gorge carved delicately into the northern lunar highlands. It stretched for over 160 kilometers, like a single elegant brushstroke drawn across a canvas of stone. From above, it resembled a soft scar, beautiful in its vulnerability, timeless in its stillness. But what made it most remarkable was not its size nor its geological history. It was the way light rested within it. Here, moonlight didn't shine, it slept. The valley lay nestled between the lunar Alps, which rose on either side like arms cradling a sacred secret. Tall, smooth ridges framed the gorge with gentle curves, their pale rock weathered by billions of years of silence. At this moment in the ship's slow glide, the sun was low behind the ridge, casting the valley into a state of deep penumbra. This wasn't full shadow, nor was it light. It was the hush between them, a quiet glowing gray, where form faded and outlines softened. It was like walking through a memory, present but untouchable. Inside Lysithea, the traveler floated forward once more, drawn by instinct rather than intention. Their eyes were wide, yet relaxed, as if trying to take in not just the sight, but the feeling of it. The valley below shimmered with a silver-blue hue, reflecting the skyward glow of Earthlight, with a texture like soft velvet. No craters marred its floor, no cliffs broke its line. It simply flowed, a line of peace etched into ancient stone. The traveler imagined walking down there, through that quiet gorge, feeling nothing but dust beneath their feet, and the endless hum of cosmic stillness above. It was not a place for noise, it was a place for breath. The ship's environmental systems adjusted automatically. The lighting within the chamber dimmed to match the tones of the terrain. Subtle grays, deep blues and silvers tinged with faint lilac. The auditory landscape followed, fading into near silence, broken only by soft crystalline tones spaced far apart, like drops of water falling into a still pool. These weren't artificial sound, they were translations, echoes of minor tonal shifts within the valley's rock, vibrations too small for any direct detection, now made perceptible in frequency and tone. The valley was singing softly, slowly, as it had for millennia. The traveler rested their head gently against the edge of the observation dome, eyes still trained on the gorge. Down there, the floor of the valley showed signs of rills, tiny grooves and lines formed long ago by ancient lava flows or crustal movement. These features, so minute and delicate, looked like strands of silver hair trailing across skin. The traveler imagined tracing them with a finger, not to analyze, not to explain, but to feel the history beneath. To read the moon's story written not in books, but in texture and shadow, in the way light curved gently along a slope before disappearing again into hut. As Lysithea passed slowly above the center of Valles Alpes, a new visual layer emerged in the chamber. A projected map of lunar temperature gradients, rendered in translucent color overlays. The temperature in the valley's deepest part was colder than nearly anywhere else on this side of the moon. Cold enough that time itself seemed to slow. Where temperature drops, so does the movement of atoms. And in that cold, the valley had held still for eons, like a thought paused mid-sentence, waiting for someone to return and finish it. But the moon didn't ask for closure. She only asked for presence. Outside, the stars above grew brighter once more, responding to the thin veil of darkness preserved within the valley's ridgelines. The shadows lengthened in harmony, forming slow-moving curtains that draped along the alpine slope. In one narrow section, the sunlight bent just so, creating a long, gentle band of illumination that passed across the valley floor like a ribbon of gold dust. It wasn't a beam, it was a suggestion, a caress of light tracing the slowest path it could find. The traveler followed it with their gaze, heart slowed, breath soft, and then in the most quiet of moments, Lysithea released a soft chime. It wasn't an alert, it was a marking, a way of acknowledging passage. The ship had passed the valley's center, the point of deepest stillness. The traveler, still weightless, smiled faintly, not from joy, not from awe, from peace, a smile born from knowing that they had been present for something eternal, not dramatic, not fleeting, but enduring, a moment that had existed long before they were born and would remain long after they were gone, and yet for a breath, they had shared it. Beneath them, the floor of Valles Alpes shimmered again as more dust lifted gently into the low gravity, catching both earthlight and starlight, weaving the two into a tapestry of silver specks. The ship magnified it for observation, filling the chamber with the illusion of drifting through those flecks. Tiny particles floated past, like soft fireflies made of frost and memory. The tones adjusted again, higher now, like strings plucked in deep water, creating chords that didn't rise or fall but hovered in suspension. The traveler let themselves sink into it, not moving, not speaking, just drifting, just being. Lysithea continued its path above the far edge of the valley, where the ground began to rise again, and the silence took on a new shape, not absence, but fullness. The ship responded in kind, restoring some of the dim ambient glow to the cabin. Not bright, never bright, just enough to hold the transition, like a gentle hand guiding one from dusk to night. The stars above turned slowly, patient and wise, and Earth hung low on the horizon now, her light faint but faithful. The alpine valley shrank behind them, folding back into the lunar canvas, but its presence lingered. The memory of its hush, the texture of its floor, the echo of its sleeping light. The traveler whispered a thank you not aloud, but in the space of their breath, a quiet gesture, one the moon surely heard. The orbit of Lysithea turned once again, gliding now beyond the familiar face of the moon into a realm rarely seen by human eyes. The far side, often called the dark side, though darkness was never quite the right word. This hidden hemisphere, forever turned away from Earth, was bathed in light just as often as the front, yet remained steeped in deeper mystery. Here, the terrain was rougher, older, and quieter in a different kind of way. It did not carry the same smooth seas or broad plains. Instead, it held a kind of sacred solitude. The traveler, watching from their quiet cocoon aboard Lysithea, felt a shift, not in the ship, but within themselves. They were not just passing over another landscape. They were crossing into a place untouched by the human gaze, where silence reigned uninterrupted for eternity. Below, the surface unfolded like a story written in stone. Jagged craters crowded one another like footprints overlapping in sand, each marking a moment in cosmic time, each older than the last. There were no great Maria here, no dark basalt lakes. The crust here was thicker, colder, and more stoic. The traveler stared out at it, not with curiosity, but with reverence. There was no need to name what they saw, no need to catalog it or commit it to memory. It was enough to float above it, to witness, to listen. For even here, on this ancient side of the moon, there was sound. Not sound carried by air, but a deeper kind, a resonance that moved through stone and silence alike. Lysithea's instruments began to hum, softly, warmly, translating subtle magnetic fields and background radiation into tones. These were not mechanical readings, they were harmonics, shaped by the interaction between the moon's crust and solar wind. On the far side, shielded from Earth's electromagnetic noise, the purity of this interaction became something otherworldly. The sound emerged slowly, a deep, pulsating rhythm, layered beneath higher chimes that rang intermittently, like starlight caught in glass. It wasn't a song in the conventional sense. It was a presence, as if the moon, undisturbed and alone for billions of years, was finally whispering in a language too old to be spoken. The traveler leaned back into their seat, eyes soft, body drifting in weightless ease. The stars outside were sharper here, undistorted by any glow from Earth. They glittered with a diamond clarity, stretched across the curved dome of space, like a slow falling snowfall. Beneath them, the moon turned in patience, and the traveler allowed themselves to turn with it, mind, breath, and body aligned with the orbit's rhythm. Nothing pulled, nothing pushed. There was only flow. In this side of the moon, the impact craters grew larger and deeper. One such basin, the South Pole, Aitken, passed below the ship like a great celestial bowl. It was one of the largest impact craters in the solar system. Yet its magnitude didn't roar, it whispered. The floor of the basin was rough and quiet, a patchwork of impact scars, frozen lava sheets, and fine dust, collecting in patterns shaped by gravity alone. Lysithea's motion slowed slightly as it neared the basin's center. The instruments adjusted, highlighting subtle heat signatures in the rock, long cooled, but not without story. As the ship floated directly over the basin, a new layer of audio formed within the observation chamber, lower than the last, a sound like distant thunder, muffled by centuries. These tones, derived from seismic echoes recorded by past probes and synthesized into audible form, resonated through the air like slow drums, each beat separated by long stretches of quiet. Between them, faint overtones lingered, not melodies, but textures, like echoes within a cavern too vast to see. The traveler closed their eyes and imagined standing there, in the middle of that great bowl, their shadow long and thin under distant sunlight, surrounded by walls of stone that had not heard a voice in a billion years. And yet in that silence, They imagined singing, not loud, not strong, but soft. A hum, a tone, a single note offered not to be answered, but simply to join the other. Here, where the moon held her truest stillness, the traveler felt the deep truth of quiet, that it was not emptiness, but fullness. A fullness too vast for sound, too sacred for language. It filled them completely, like warmth soaking into skin after a long night. There was no need for movement, no urge to speak. They were already part of the stillness, already woven into the moon's unseen rhythm. The ship continued its orbit, slow and sure, now passing over a terrain marked with rolling hills. Unusual for the moon's far side, these were not jagged or chaotic, but gently curved, covered in fine powder that sparkled faintly under oblique light. Here and there, subtle reflections danced across the surface, micro glints of lunar glass, formed by the fusion of sand and heat during ancient impacts. Lysithea's optical systems magnified them, and suddenly the chamber was filled with slow-moving glimmers. They moved like a field of fireflies, each twinkle carrying its own gentle vibration, each tied to a real point on the moon's surface. They weren't just light, they were data transformed into grace. The traveler floated among them in the ship's cabin, which had grown quiet once more. No music, no interface sounds, only the glints and the low pulse of the moon's crust humming steadily below. They imagined reaching out a hand and catching one of the glimmers, feeling its warmth, though it emitted none, holding it gently before letting it float away again, like letting go of a thought. It was all so slow, so kind, so deeply still. Eventually the ship reached the far side's rim, approaching the line where the moon would turn once more toward Earth's familiar glow. But this crossing would not be dramatic. There were no thresholds on the moon, only transitions, only a continuous unfolding. As Lysithea neared the terminator line, the traveler looked back once more at the basin, the hills, the ancient terrain. They didn't try to remember it all. They didn't have to. The memory wasn't meant to be carried. It was meant to become them. The far side began to fade behind them, replaced again by the slow blush of reflected Earthlight, and the tone in the chamber shifted once more, this time to a higher harmony, layered with soft overlapping frequencies, like voices echoing through soft clouds. It was the moon's final lullaby before sleep. The traveler reclined again, limbs loose, breath even, the rhythm of space now completely embedded within them. There were no more questions, no more thoughts needing answers. There was only this: a moon turning slowly, a ship gliding gently, a traveler dreaming in rhythm with the tides of space. The moon turned again, slow and ever patient, and Lysithea sailed onward into a quieter quadrant of its orbit, one seldom featured in books or bright maps. Below stretched Lacus Somniorum, the Lake of Dreams. Not truly a lake, not even in the moon's symbolic language of seas and bays, but a sprawling patch of gentle plains dusted in ancient basalt, nestled northeast of Mare Serenitatis. It held no towering craters, no dramatic ridges. It was a place of openness, of softened terrain and subtle transitions. A place perhaps for minds to rest more than eyes to marvel. And from the way the ship's lights dimmed and its systems calmed, even Lysithea understood the sacredness of what lay below. The traveler floated in perfect stillness, bathed in the soft blue ambiance that always followed a descent into this sector. The observation dome widened its field of view, revealing a grand sweep of the surface, a nearly unbroken field, silvery and vast, where time had brushed its fingers over stone so gently that even the smallest rises felt deliberate. Below, the light came not from the sun directly, but from Earthlight again, scattered now, refracted by a fine dustfall that had begun to rise across the plain. It was a rare phenomenon, something only witnessed when conditions aligned, the mixing of charged regolith with the gentle gradient between lunar night and day, stirred by slow but active fields of electrostatic energy. The dust didn't billow or swirl, There was no atmosphere to hold such drama. Instead, it floated upward, thousands of delicate specks glimmering as they rose from the surface in slow arcs. They drifted, suspended in an airless stillness, reflecting light like dew on invisible threads. And in that moment, the entire basin below seemed to exhale in silver. The traveler leaned forward, unable to look away. It wasn't dazzling. It wasn't bright. It was soft, intimate, like watching stardust fall upward. The ship's instruments recorded the event not with fanfare, but with reverence. The soundscape shifted into a tonal wash of high harmonics, like 1,000 quiet wind chimes all playing one note in perfect synchrony, stretched across time. These weren't sounds heard, but felt resonances that sank into the body, aligning heartbeats with motion, breath with light. Through the dome's wide glass, the dustfall grew denser, painting the lake in shimmer. Unlike snow, these particles didn't fall or flutter. They danced in slow, looping trail. It was as if the moon herself had reached into her long memory and stirred the surface, releasing forgotten fragments into the night. The traveler let themselves drift closer to the dome, their reflection faint among the stars beyond. There was a stillness in their face now, the same kind found on ancient statues, calm, complete, at peace. Lacus Somniorum's floor, faintly visible beneath the haze, revealed its slow curves and meandering rill. These ancient river-like grooves stretched across the plain like long forgotten paths. Scientists once believed they formed from lava flows. Others imagined collapsed tunnels or crustal slips. But none of that mattered to the traveler now. All that mattered was the shape, the feeling of those lines drawn gently into the moon's face. They weren't roads, they were lullabies. The traveler traced one with their gaze, watching it vanish beneath the glimmering veil of dust, like a secret folded into sleep. Inside the ship, Lysithea dimmed its instrumentation to a minimum, recognizing that this was not a moment for data collection. It was a moment to witness. All across the chamber, small soft lights echoed the rhythm of the dust outside, gently pulsing in time with the particles' drift. The traveler reached out a hand and let the light touch their palm. It felt warm even though there was no temperature. It felt personal, even though it came from stars and minerals. It was connection, not contact. And in that quiet communion, the traveler felt their mind ease even further, thoughts dissolving like frost under morning light. Far below, the dust continued its slow ascent. The traveler imagined walking there, through that basin, each step lifting a halo of powder into the void, never falling, just joining the slow orbit of forgotten dreams. They imagined lying back against the surface, letting the silver veil wrap around them, not like a blanket, more like a cocoon, a place where one could become something else, not changed, just undone, untangled, free from memory, free from time. Lysithea remained in position, hovering gently over the center of the basin. The orbital path had paused, adjusted slightly, as though the ship itself wanted more time here. In the heart of the Lake of Dreams, the stars seemed to blink more slowly. The moon's subtle pulse always there. In the ship's sensors, the chamber's tones had steadied into a rhythm softer than breath. The traveler inhaled, then exhaled, not to wake or to sleep, but simply to stay, to be. After long, still minutes, the dust began to thin. It didn't vanish, it settled. Some particles descended slowly back to the surface. Others floated upward toward orbit, carried into a silence that had no ceiling. The shimmer faded, revealing the plain below once more. The traveler watched as the ground returned soft, unchanged, eternal. The Lake of Dreams had closed its eyes again. A gentle vibration passed through the cabin floor, a signal from Lysithea that the orbit would now resume. The ship's engines pulsed quietly, and the view began to The basin passed beneath the rearward windows, shrinking like a remembered song at the end of a dream. The traveler whispered their thanks into the still air. Whether it reached the moon or not didn't matter. It had been said, it had been felt. Ahead, the ship approached a new horizon. The light was returning, warmer now as the sun's angle began to rise beyond the mountains of the northeast limb. The shadows would begin to shrink, the dust would still again, but the traveler carried with them the echo of what they had seen.
A moment when the moon had opened her hand and let stardust rise from her skin like breath. They closed their eyes not to rest, not to sleep, but to hold the shape of stillness a little longer.
Beyond the veil of the Lake of Dreams, where silver dust had danced upward in silence, Lysithea continued her slow arc toward the northeast, where the Montes Remae, the Rilla Mountains, rose like ancient threads pulled taut across the moon's surface. This was not a region of towering peaks or grand formations. Instead, it was a network of winding fissures and low ridges, some nearly invisible except under the slanted touch of twilight. But the moon knew how to reveal her quietest beauty only to those who watched slowly. And Lysithea, like the traveler within her, had mastered the art of slowness. The light here was neither bright nor dim. It was twilight, that fleeting edge between day and night, where the sun barely kissed the land and shadows grew long and pale. As the ship glided gently over the Montes Remae, the terrain below took on a soft bronze tone, as though dusted with powdered copper. The traveler, still wrapped in the gentle hush left behind by Laches Somnorum, floated close to the observation dome, their hand resting lightly against the glass. The moon below looked like a fabric stretched across the sky, textured, lined, and luminous with sleep. And then the bells began. They weren't true bells, of course, not crafted, not struck. But Lysithea's sensors began to pick up low-frequency pulses from beneath the Rilla formations, resonant echoes of long-cooled magma tunnels and collapsed crustal layers. The moon, under the gentle warmth of twilight, was singing again, and this time, her voice was deep and chime-like. The sounds filtered into the cabin in slow intervals, each tone long-sustained, spaced widely apart. They rang with a gentle metallic quality, as if someone had run their fingers over ancient bowls made of silver dust. The traveler's eyes softened. The tones didn't demand attention. They drifted through the space like the scent of rain through an open window. The sounds didn't end. They faded, and each new note rose like a breath just beginning. The chamber's ambient lights dimmed again, adjusting to the subtle tones, casting soft bands of amber and blue across the traveler's skin. There was nothing sharp in this space, not a single corner of light or sound. Everything curved, everything flowed. Beneath them, the Rillas themselves revealed their quiet beauty. Thin fissures only meters wide in places, traced across the surface like veins through marble. Some forked delicately, others curved back into themselves, forming open spirals on the plane. These features, formed by the cooling and shrinking of ancient lava tubes, were rarely considered picturesque. But here, under the hush of twilight, they gleamed softly, edges catching the light like calligraphy carved into stone. The moon was not cracked. She was written upon her surface, a poem of stillness. The traveler imagined walking down there, following one of those winding paths, not with boots or suits, but barefoot, feeling the texture of the surface beneath. They imagined running a hand along the edge of a Rilla, feeling its coolness, its gentle rise. No wind, no sound, only the distant echo of the bells, faint, rhythmic, steady. Perhaps they'd sit at the edge of one, watching Earthrise appear in the distance, casting her silver light across the Rilla floor. Perhaps they would listen so deeply that even thought itself would stop whispering. Inside Lysithea, a new layer of sound was added, an almost imperceptible vibration drawn from the moon's magnetic interactions with the solar wind at this latitude. It translated into something like a deep string being bowed very slowly. This low tone underscored the bells in the same way a heartbeat supports a lullaby. It made the traveler feel held, grounded, anchored in something older than language. Their breath came slower, time stretched. The ship drifted farther over the Montes Remae, and soon the terrain began to ripple again. Slightly higher elevations forming gentle plateaus along the edge of the region. These undulations, worn and weathered, caught the last of the twilight light, forming glowing ridges that looked almost translucent in their stillness. The traveler blinked slowly. Below, the Rillas glimmered like rivulets of frost in fading sun. A visualization began to bloom on the dome above, Lysithea's, sensors displaying stress maps of the crust, overlaid with pulses of sound in real time.
Each fissure glowed with its own rhythm. Each note of the moon's twilight bells was tethered to a part of the land below. The traveler found themselves floating in a space filled with musical geography, a map not of land, but of resonance. It was as though the moon herself had become a vast, silver instrument, played gently by the shifting fingers of space. For long, quiet minutes, the traveler let themselves drift, not thinking, not searching, just existing in the middle of it all. The lights, the tones, the pulse of the land below, it all moved through them. They had become less a passenger, and more a part of the ship, more a part of the moon. Eventually the last light of twilight slipped beneath the horizon. The bronze tones faded, replaced by the cool silver of early lunar night. The bells, one by one, softened, until only the heartbeat string remained low, long, steady. The ship's lights shifted again, moving into indigo, preparing for another cycle of darkness and stars. The traveler floated gently back from the dome, eyes still open, but now unfocused. They didn't need to look anymore. The moon was no longer below, it was with. The Montes Rimae fell away behind them, tucked once more beneath the blanket of night. But their music lingered, echoing in the quiet places of memory. The moon turned on, the dream deepened, and the journey continued.
Lysithea's soft course carried her once more across the lunar equator, gliding now above a strange and subtle region, Polus Prudenes, the Marsh of Decay. The name given long ago by earthbound astronomers seemed misleading. There was no decay here, only transformation. No rot, no ruin, only the passage of time, so slow it became stillness. This is a land not of death, but of resting. The moon did not know endings, only settling. And here, above these gentle plains, light passed not through the land, but within it. From the glass canopy of the observation dome, the traveler gazed down at the wide, shallow basin unfolding below. Polus Prudenes stretched across the northeastern reach of Mare Imbrium, formed of ancient basalt flows, smoothed by time and silence. Its surface shimmered in places with traces of old iron-rich lava, now cooled and fine as powder. No jagged craters interrupted its quiet stretch, only the meandering rills, soft hills, and occasional patches where the light, as it always did here, behaved in strange and beautiful ways. The moment Lysithea crossed the boundary of this place, the light in the chamber changed. It dimmed, yes, but not into darkness. Instead, it became hollow, a silvery translucence that felt not like illumination, but like the memory of light. The moon below mirrored it. The basin's surface absorbed sunlight and earthlight alike, diffusing them so delicately that no edges remained. Shadows bled gently into brightness. Forms lost their sharpness. It was as if the very concept of definition had softened, and everything the traveler saw was caught between presence and dream. The traveler drifted weightless near the dome, eyes half closed, body resting in the slow rhythm of orbit. Their breath moved to match the hum beneath them, a low pulse generated by the moon's crustal echoes and the magnetic interactions now present in this part of the orbit. This hum was steady, warmer than before, like the sound of wind behind thick glass. It filled the space not as music but as atmosphere. It did not speak, it held the traveler, the moment, the memory. From above, Polus Prudenes looked like velvet, brushed one direction, then another. Its surface bore waves and soft lines, formed from once molten stone that had cooled slowly, flowing across invisible valleys. These waves were not dramatic, only perceptible through light and patience. Lysithea's visual sensors highlighted the subtle shifts, translating them into motion within the chamber's visual field. Now, all around the traveler, those patterns flowed like ink, spreading slowly in water. Soft, circular, hypnotic. A thin ridge came into view beneath the ship, an ancient fold in the basin floor, no more than a few dozen meters high,
but stretching for kilometers. As the sun's angle shifted just enough, a glowing band of light skimmed across its. For a few minutes it appeared as though the ridge had become a line of moonlight, hovering just above the surface, like the string of an invisible instrument strung across the plains. The ship captured the moment and turned it into a tone, an impossibly long note, drawn out slowly, deeper than thought, softer than memory. The traveler exhaled. They didn't remember taking the breath. Everything now was seamless, inside and out. Time no longer passed in seconds. It passed in light, in vibration, in the soft hush between one thought and the next. Putenis held many secrets, none of which Lysithea tried to solve. Ancient lava tubes still wound through its subsurface, collapsed here and there intact elsewhere. A quiet network beneath the visible terrain. The ship's sensors picked up faint gravitational anomalies, where mass shifted slightly, small voids beneath the land. The traveler imagined them endless tunnels, dark and dormant, yet still breathing in their own way. They imagined themselves floating through one, arms outstretched, their movements slow, echoing the way the moon herself moved, unhurried, unchanging. In one sector of the basin, just west of the ridges, the dust lifted again, not in storms but in pillars, thin, slow columns of charged regolith, rising a few meters into space. The Earthlight caught them first, then the faint limb of the sun touched their edges. The columns shimmered, glowing like vertical rivers, suspended in gravity's gentlest pull. To the traveler they looked like pillars of breath, rising from the moon itself, as if the land exhaled slowly, with intention. The auditory landscape responded again. New tones, layered and fluid, entered the chamber, drawn from the way the dust's motion affected, reflected light, which in turn created vibrational readings too delicate for speech. These sounds did not begin or end. They blended. They moved in and out of perception like clouds through a dream. The traveler let them in, not to understand, but to dissolve. For a moment, the traveler allowed themselves to float backward, away from the dome into the center of the chamber. Here, surrounded by sound and glow, with the moon below and the stars above, they simply rested, weightless, thoughtless, open. Their body turned slightly, slowly, like a leaf suspended in water. And in that rotation, their view of the moon shifted again, this time revealing a distant crater at the basin's edge. Archimedes, the great silent sentinel, loomed far off to the west, its walls glowing faintly in the low light. But even here it felt subdued, not imposing, not bold, just present, watching, waiting. Like everything on the moon, it had learned the art of stillness. Lysithea's systems detected a soft increase in cosmic background radiation, normal, harmless, but enough to trigger a change in visual overlays. The dome filled briefly with a simulation of photon trails, drawn in slow arcs across the traveler's vision. These weren't real lines, but representations of starlight's journey, light that had traveled millions of years to arrive here, brushing gently across the moon, across Lysithea, and across the quiet body of the traveler now held in sleep without sleep. The ship adjusted its orbit slightly, preparing to rise from the basin. Putenis began to shrink in the windows, fading back into the greater canvas of Mare Imbrium, but its light lingered. That hollow light, the memory of illumination, the echo of presence, remained in the chamber long after the land had passed beneath. The traveler blinked slowly, then smiled, not with lips, but with heart. For in this hollow-lit place, something had unfolded within them. Not something new, something remembered. A softness, a belonging, a truth too gentle for words.
The moon had turned again, not with urgency, not with force, but with the slow certainty of tides, shaped by time alone. Lysithea now approached the heart of one of the most majestic lunar formations, Copernicus Crater, known to Earth-based eyes as a crown jewel of the moon's front-facing side. It stood vast and commanding, its diameter spanning 93 kilometers, its central peak reaching gently upward, like the steeple of a silent cathedral. But seen from here, from orbit, beneath the hush of space and surrounded by the ghost light of Earthshine. Copernicus was not bold or bright. It was reverent. The traveler floated quietly toward the wide observation dome as the ship descended slightly in orbit, bringing the crater into full view. Copernicus did not shout its presence. It welcomed. The first glimpse was of its wide circular rim, softly illuminated by the shallow angle of light. From this height, it looked like the mouth of a great stone bell, ready to ring not with sound but with stillness. Inside, the walls descended in gentle rippling terraces, each formed over eons by falling rock, collapsing edges and the patient hand of erosion by time alone. No wind had sculpted it. No water had carved its face, only the moon's own slow memory. The traveler's breath slowed as the ship drifted into position directly above the crater's center. Below, the central peaks of Copernicus rose like frozen prayer, sharp yet softened by dust and shadow. In the low gravity, these peaks had barely changed in millions of years. They stood quiet and proud, untouched by anything but light. As Earthlight washed across them, their edges caught in delicate shimmer, soft lines, like the folds of fabric pulled gently across a sleeping form. Inside Lysithea, the atmosphere shifted. The ambient lighting changed hue to match the reflected light from the crater below. Muted gray-white, layered with blue and subtle lavender. The soundscape, too, adjusted. Deep, bell-like tones emerged, slow and resonant. These were not simulations of bells, but translations frequencies, derived from seismic echoes, measured by sensors embedded deep in the moon's crust. The impact that formed Copernicus had sent waves through the lunar interior, waves still reverberating in micro-measurements today. The ship's instruments listened carefully, then rendered those rhythms into tones that filled the chamber like sacred chants, a cathedral of silence, built from stone and breath. The traveler drifted into the center of the room, eyes half closed, body wrapped in warmth and wonder. The tones vibrated not through air, but through the very walls of the ship, through the floor, through the bones. It was a sound felt more than heard, like the softest bell ever cast, rung in the center of a vast, breathless sanctuary. They reached out, almost unconsciously, their fingers brushing the curve of the dome, and for a moment, they felt it, the resonance of the moon, the vastness, the patience, the peace. The view below deepened. As Lysithea passed into slow orbit around the crater, the angle shifted to reveal more of the interior, massive boulders resting in shadow, glimmering lines of regolith, spread like stardust trails across the floor. Some had been blown outward during the ancient impact, forming long radial lines that reached beyond the rim like rays of stone light, each one a whisper from the past. The ship's projection systems activated gently, displaying historical overlays of Copernicus over the millennia. Without a word or a prompt, the traveler watched as translucent imagery showed the slow collapse of walls, the subtle shift of dust patterns, the unhurried erosion of time. These were not animations. They were expressions of patience, a planet-sized meditation, the moon teaching stillness. And then, a shimmer from within the crater as Earthlight reached its full illumination across the central peaks. A soft mist of dust began to rise, not like fog, not rolling or curling, but ascending in threads, as if the land itself was exhaling. These particles lifted gently into the low lunar gravity, caught in the delicate electrostatic charge between light and rock. In silence, they floated upward, tracing invisible lines in the sky, and for a brief time, the crater filled not with sound, but with the movement of dreams made visible. Lysithea's visual system magnified the view. The interior of the ship grew dimmer still, until the only light was the glowing movement of that rising dust, projected in slow motion arcs, all around the chamber. It felt not like watching, but like floating within it. The traveler turned, arms drifting, breath long and even, as the tones deepened further, low, vast and warm.
Each rising thread of dust was mapped to a tone. Each shift in light cast across the floor of Copernicus became a soft harmonic pulse. Together they formed a tapestry of calm unlike any other. A moon breathing through stone and dust, and a traveler listening with every part of their being. Minutes passed, perhaps hours. The boundary between them dissolved. The traveler imagined descending, stepping lightly onto the rim of the crater, standing with feet half buried in fine powder. Around them, the stone would stretch outward like the inside of a bell, sloping downward into soft shadow. They would walk to the edge of a terrace, then another, finally finding themselves at the base, standing beneath the central peaks. And there, beneath the weight of time and the silence of stars, they would sit, not to think, not to remember, just to be. Above, Earth would rise slowly, casting her light like a blessing. The stars would remain constant, and the moon would hum, as she always had. Lysithea began its slow ascent, its orbit lifting gently, carrying the traveler upward once more. The cathedral of Copernicus faded below, folded back into the curves of the lunar horizon, but its music remained a deep echo woven into the chamber walls, into the ship's very breath. The traveler touched their chest lightly, feeling the resonance still there. A soft bell ringing in the hollow spaces between heartbeat and silence. The moon turned again.
The moon, ever turning in silence, now revealed one of her most graceful features. A place not marked by towering cliffs or thunderous birth, but by elegance sculpted from eons, Sinus Iridum. The Bay of Rainbow, nestled in the northwestern curve of Mare Imbrium. It lay half embraced by the towering Jura Mountains, forming a gentle arc that curved like the crescent of a sleeping eye. There was no rain here. No clouds had ever passed overhead. Yet from orbit, under the slanting glow of early lunar dawn, the bay shimmered as though dusted in starlight, and the mountains that framed it glowed with the faded gold of old memory. Lysithea entered the region in silence, engines near idle, gliding like breath across the edges of morning. The ship's internal systems adjusted to match the pale palette of the landscape. The ambient glow within the observation chamber shifted into cool whites and soft grays, tinged with the faintest lavender colors that seemed to belong to dreams more than to stone. The traveler stirred, floating closer to the dome, as the Bay of Rainbows slowly unfurled below, its form a gentle sigh of stone and light. From above, the terrain looked softened, as if centuries of shadow had smoothed its edge. The mare floor was dark and even, a wide basalt plain flowing gently toward the Jura Mountains. At the border where the plain met the mountains, the regolith grew lighter, grains reflecting more earthlight, forming a silver shoreline along the curve. In some places, the mountains rose sharply, their slopes streaked with landslide scars. In others, they sloped gradually, allowing shadow and shimmer to mingle in a dance that moved without sound. The traveler floated still, arms at their sides, heart slow, eyes wide with wonder. There was something different about this place, something deeper. The ship's sensors seemed to agree. Without prompt, the ambient soundscape adjusted to a new arrangement. A composition of tones drawn from gravity gradients, mapped across the bay. The sounds were faint but layered, each one stretching out like a thread from the mountains to the sea. As if the land were whispering across its own surface, they wove together into a sound both earthy and celestial. A song shaped like a circle, a halo in sound. As Lysithea descended gently into lower orbit, the Bay of Rainbows filled the dome with ever greater detail. Small craters peppered the plain like tiny resting places. Most had softened rims, worn smooth by time and the gentle settling of dust. At the far end of the bay, where the plain tapered into the curved mountain ring, the traveler saw one crater gleaming brighter than the others. It was Laplace A, perched at the edge like a gemstone placed just so. Sunlight skimmed its edge, revealing shadows within shadows,
as if the crater held secrets folded into itself. The ship came to a soft hover, not to stop the journey, but to linger in stillness, like taking a deep breath and holding it, letting silence fill every space. Then the veil rose. From the far side of the Jura Mountains, sunlight began to spill. Slowly, softly, a thin line of brightness slid across the peaks, catching their ridges in delicate brilliance. It wasn't fast, it wasn't loud. It was like dawn arriving in a cathedral through stained glass. Each stone edge lit up, then dimmed as the light moved along. The traveler watched, transfixed, as that veil of light slipped over the mountains and crept across the bay. The regolith responded. Fine dust lifted just slightly. An invisible breeze stirred not by wind, but by the charge between light and surface. The ship's cameras caught it all, amplifying what the human eye could not see. Thousands of particles dancing upward, glinting like silver fireflies. The ship's systems translated this motion into sound again. Soft, high-pitched pulses, each one echoing the ascent of dust from stone. It was like listening to the sky inhale. The traveler let their eyes close briefly. In their mind, they walked barefoot across the bay, the dust rising with every step. No suit, no gravity, just stillness and shimmer. They knelt at the edge of a ridge, placed a hand into the soft terrain, and felt the hum of the land beneath. The moon didn't speak, she never had, but she held. She listened back, and in that silence, something opened within, like a door to the deepest kind of peace. A peace born not from escape, but from complete return. Inside Lysithea, the ambient tones deepened, weaving in faint harmonics from past seismic echoes recorded in the Jura range. The sound filled the room like mist, never crowding, only wrapping. It moved with the traveler's breath, followed the slow arc of their heartbeat. Even the ship itself seemed to exhale. Above, Earth rose just a sliver now, casting her cold light across the peaks. Where her light met the lunar sunlight, a soft tension formed, a blending of glows that cast subtle halo effects across the dome. The traveler opened their eyes, bathed in that dual light, and felt the moon and earth fold together in a single perfect moment. The Bay of Rainbows lay beneath like a cradle of calm. Its dust settled, its light unveiled. The moon continued to turn, the journey remained steady, and the dream ever soft, ever slow, deepened.
As Lysithea began another gentle drift along its orbital path, the moon's vast western face slowly unfolded beneath the hull. There, stretching farther than any other feature on the lunar surface, lay a plain so immense, so quiet, it had earned a name both grand and poetic: Oceanus Procellarum, the ocean of storms. But here, above its great expanse, there was no sign of turmoil. No storm clouds, no rain, only stillness so wide it could cradle 1,000 dreams without stirring a single one. The traveler hovered in place, arms adrift, as this enormous sea of silence stretched to every horizon. An ocean not of water but of memory. The landscape below was smoother than most lunar regions, its basalt plains forged long ago by immense volcanic events. From Earth, Oceanus Procellarum appeared as a dark, featureless patch, but from Lysithea, under the hush of space and the whispering of star-fed sensors, the plain came alive with texture. Low ripples spread across the surface, like the last breath of a wave frozen in time. Subtle elevation changes moved like windless dunes, and faint mineral traces reflected Earthlight in hues of deep indigo and gray-blue, like ashes kissed by moonlight. The ship's instruments began to read the variations across the plain: gravity gradients, iron concentrations, the delicate pull of ancient lava channels flowing beneath the surface. These data, translated through Lysithea's harmonic systems, produced a soundscape unlike any other. Gone were the bells and pulses of previous passages. Here, the moon sang in low, continuous chords, like the breath of a giant sleeping beneath the stone. It was not music, it was weight. It was depth, a voice that didn't speak. It simply was. Inside the observation chamber, the lighting darkened to match the subdued palette outside. Thin bands of soft blue shimmered across the interior walls, mimicking the motion of invisible tides. Though no tides moved here, the effect was felt more than seen. A pressure that did not press, a vastness that did not overwhelm. The traveler drew a slow breath, held it and let it go in rhythm with the tones. They did not try to understand the feeling growing in their chest. They simply allowed it to settle, like dust returning to its home. From above, certain areas of the plain revealed intricate networks of wrinkle ridges, low, winding hills that crisscrossed the surface in gentle, undulating arcs. These formations, created by the slow cooling and contraction of lava beneath the crust, looked like threads in a vast, forgotten tapestry. Some stretched for hundreds of kilometers, never rising more than a few dozen meters. The traveler imagined tracing them, walking slowly along their length with no destination, feet stirring the regolith into slow-motion spirals. Their path a line drawn in dust. A gentle pulse passed through the chamber. It came not from the ship, but from the moon, registered by onboard sensors as a distant moonquake, likely a thermal shift deep within the crust. These subtle quakes were frequent but faint, too quiet for the unaided ear. Yet through Lysithea's filters, the tremor translated into a long, soft note that vibrated through the walls of the ship like the hum of a tuning fork left in space. The tone stretched endlessly, never breaking, just thinning into silence. The traveler let their fingers drift through the ambient light as the view below shifted. In the distance, nestled within the ocean's vast plain, a lone crater appeared. Reiner Gamma, an anomaly among anomalies. Unlike most lunar craters, Reiner Gamma was not formed by impact. It bore no raised walls, no central peak. Instead, it shimmered with swirling bright albedo patterns, like white wind trails etched across the dark plains. Scientists had long debated its origin: magnetic anomalies, cometary interactions, surface charging. But from above, it didn't ask for explanation. It asked only to be witnessed. The ship passed directly over it. Below, the swirls curved and flowed in looping tendrils, like smoke frozen in place. The regolith glinted with unexpected brightness, refracting Earthlight in unique mirrored pattern. As Lysithea hovered, the light began to form arcs inside the dome, a visual symphony of curves, drifting slowly around the traveler like ghost ribbons in low gravity. Each arc corresponded to a swirl on the surface, and each shimmer created a new note, sharp, soft, layered, like whispers spoken into water. It was a place of stillness that moved. The traveler closed their eyes, allowing the motion of the light and the sound to carry them deep. No longer floating in orbit, no longer in a ship, they were in the moon now, among its plains, its echoes, its old vast breath. They imagined standing at the edge of one of Reiner Gamma's swirls, toes against the dust, watching the lines stretch out in curves, so long they vanished into the horizon. The stars above blinked slowly, gentle. The surface, lit in that strange glowing silver, pulsed faintly, not visually, but emotionally. The moon was remembering. When the traveler opened their eyes again, the ship was still gliding forward, slowly leaving Reiner Gamma behind. The rest of Oceanus Procellarum stretched on endlessly, broken only by smaller craters and scattered rays, faint trails of light dust thrown out by distant impacts, weaving across the plains like forgotten paths. The sound in the chamber softened, lowered, thinned to almost nothing. A sound so subtle it resembled more the absence of thought than the presence of tone. The traveler sank deeper into their seat, breath now so slow it might have stopped. Lysithea began to rise slightly, entering a higher orbital altitude to prepare for the next leg of its journey. The plains below receded, folding themselves back into the curvature of the moon, like a sea retreating into sleep. But Oceanus Procellarum left something behind, a feeling of magnitude, not just of size, but of space within, a vastness the traveler had never known in themselves until now. The stars blinked, the ship turned gently, and the moon, never still, continued to dream. As Lysithea passed beyond the long hushed stretch of Oceanus Procellarum, the ship veered slightly southward, tracing the lunar curvature like a hand stroking the edge of sleep. Below, a different landscape began to emerge, older, more fractured, as though worn smooth by time's gentle persistence. Rising from the dark plains came the vast, ancient footprint of a crater, so wide it could swallow entire cities and still have room for the stars. Deslandres is one of the moon's oldest known scars, a ghostly basin over 230 kilometers across. But Deslandres didn't roar its age. It whispered it. Seen from above, it didn't look like a wound. It looked like a cradle, a vast bowl of stone and shadow nestled among the surrounding highlands. Its edges crumbled and faded, half merged with the terrain around it. From Earth, only slivers of its rim are visible, blended into the surface. But from here, from orbit, under the soft touch of Earthlight and starlight combined, Deslandres opened like a memory long buried, patient, still and sacred. The traveler floated toward the dome, pulled not by motion, but by presence. The light within the observation chamber dimmed once again, deepening into hues of sepia and twilight mauve. These were the tones of age, of softness, of stone touched 1,000 times by silence. The ship slowed, not because it had to, but because one doesn't rush through a dream this old. Below, the inner basin of Deslandres unfolded slowly. Its floor was textured with ancient impacts, craters within craters, scattered like soft footprints across a desert floor. Some had been partially erased, others filled in by dust, their rims no more than whispers in the regolith. And yet, there was no chaos. Everything here rested. Every ridge, every depression, every scattered fragment lay exactly where time had placed it, unmoved and unmoving. The land didn't resist erosion, it invited. Inside Lysithea, the ship's ambient systems picked up faint magnetic signals not strong enough to register as anomalies, but enough to weave new threads into the soundscape. The traveler heard them now. Low, melodic murmurs, deep and wide, like tones struck from buried stone bowls filled with dust. The sounds arrived slowly, each note blooming outward and fading back into quiet. It felt like the earth itself had forgotten how to make sound like this. But the moon had remembered. The ship dipped lower. From this altitude, the traveler could see the subtle shadows cast by small crater rims scattered across Deslandres' floor. As light skimmed their edges, it created a woven pattern, like ancient lace laid over gray velvet. And at the center of it all, a darker patch, low-lying, smooth, perhaps once filled with lava, now layered with centuries of stillness. The traveler imagined walking there, steps muffled by a surface so soft and untouched it felt like dreamstone. No footprints ahead, no sounds behind, just the sense of being welcomed by something that had waited without expectation. Then, like a breath held in the dark, a shimmer. Tiny motes of dust began to rise from the crater's center. Only a few at first, just enough to catch the eye as they danced through Earthlight. They moved slowly, vertically, like seeds lifted on invisible threads. The moon's soft electric fields had stirred them, as it sometimes did near dawn. And though there was no atmosphere, the motion felt like mist, rising from stone warmed by starlight. Lysithea's external optics followed them upward, tracing their movement and reflecting it into the observation dome. Now the chamber filled with floating specks of silver, drifting through the air like glimmering memories. They passed the traveler's face, hovered near their outstretched hand, and slipped around their body like echoes with no sound. The ship translated the motion into subtle sound pulses. Quiet, radiant chimes played so softly they didn't seem to come from any direction. They simply existed, everywhere at once. The traveler floated in place, still and peaceful, letting the dust real and virtual drift around them. They imagined lying in the basin below, body curled gently on the regolith, not cold, not heavy, but held. They saw themselves resting beneath the stars, surrounded by crumbling crater walls that felt more like ancient arms embracing a long sleep. No danger, no weight, just time folding over itself layer by layer,
Like blankets drawn over a dreaming mind, a new layer of sound emerged. Not bells, not hums. This time it was a choral wave, slow and deep, voiceless, yet warm. It pulsed through the floor and walls of the ship in intervals, matching the moon's slow internal resonance, recorded during deep seismic readings and rendered now into audible form. The traveler didn't recognize the sound as musical. They recognized it as belonging. They floated closer to the dome again. Deslandres was passing beneath them, its far rim nearing the horizon. Soon it would slip behind Lysithea's orbit, but the impression it left was immovable. Below, the last slivers of shadow kissed the crater's western walls, and a soft golden rim glowed where sunlight began to skim the edge. The traveler watched as one final particle of dust rose slowly into space, caught the last of the Earthlight, and vanished. The moon had turned. The ship resumed its motion, but Deslandres remained behind like a poem written in shadow, a place where time had not stopped but where time had rested. The traveler exhaled, body limp with calm, heart steady. Their eyes fluttered closed, not to sleep, but to carry the silence deeper. The moon, the cradle, the ship, the breath, the journey, eternal.
Far across the moon's quiet southern limb, in a territory rarely touched even by orbiters, the landscape grew wild and ancient. Shadows lengthened there, not because of nightfall, but because of form. Great canyons, broken ridges, and fractured basins stretched like forgotten thoughts across the land. And nestled among them, hidden near the rim of the vast South Pole, Aitken Basin, lay a secret known only to the moon's deepest dreamers, Schrödinger crater. This place was not easily seen from Earth. It belonged to the far side, out of sight, out of reach, but not out of meaning. As Lysithea approached the region, descending on a long, deliberate arc, the crater revealed itself slowly. First the edge, a sharply defined rim, nearly 320 kilometers across, still rugged after billions of years. Then the central ring, unique among lunar features, a second, inner circle of mountains rising from the floor like a crown laid gently into stone. And finally, at the very center, a valley winding between the peaks and dusted in the soft glow of Earthlight, reflected by the lunar exosphere. The traveler drifted slowly forward in the observation chamber. The lighting within had shifted once again, now a deep, cool indigo with faint silver-blue glints. It wasn't dark, it was deep, the kind of deep that made silence feel sacred, the kind of deep that wrapped around you like water and made even your breath seem reverent. The stars above the crater were sharper here, as though space itself leaned closer to this hidden sanctuary. Time did not pass, it waited. Lysithea's sound systems began to pulse with something new. Slow tremors translated into soft, hollow notes, like water droplets echoing through a cave. The moon spoke differently here, not in hums or harmonies but in echo. The ship had begun to map subtle seismic patterns beneath the crater's layered crust, and it discovered that the vibrations, however faint, bounced between the rim and the central ring in rhythms too complex for math, but perfect for music. The chamber filled with that echo music, now spaced in long intervals, so each tone could breathe, expand, and fade. The traveler floated still, arms at their sides, face tilted toward the vastness below. From this angle, the valley within Schrödinger was clear, a winding path of ancient rock and smoother plains, winding its way through the central ring like a ribbon of shadow. Inside the valley were smaller craters, old lava flows and fractures, fine, gossamer thin cracks that caught the starlight and refracted it in pale threads. They weren't faults, they were fingerprints. The moon's own quiet story pressed into her skin. As the ship entered a hover directly above the crater's center, a thin haze appeared at the valley floor. Not fog, there's no water here, but a dust shimmer caused by electrostatic levitation, where thermal contrast created charge. The dust rose in faint waves,
slow and soundless. It caught Earthlight in long drifting sheets, giving the valley a ghostly sheen, a dream unfolding through stone. Lysithea magnified the image. The shimmering dust became a galaxy of floating points, turning slowly in the chamber's dome projection. It was like looking through a snow globe that had forgotten how to fall. The traveler turned within it, weightless, as if the ship were no longer orbiting the moon, but gliding through a memory, circling something long hidden and softly remembered. The sounds adjusted to the seismic echoes slowed further. Beneath them, Lysithea played a gentle subharmonic drone, its frequency drawn from the natural resonance of the moon's lower mantle. It was a tone so low it could barely be heard, more a feeling than a sound. The traveler placed a hand on the wall, felt it vibrate, and let their own heartbeat fall into sync. From this height, the central mountains were visible in profile. Their peaks weren't tall, but they were sharp, jagged spires reaching upward like fingers from the core of the crater, lit faintly on their edges. Between them, narrow passes opened into the valley, forming what appeared to be natural gateways, like the remains of a forgotten city carved by silence. The traveler imagined descending there, stepping softly between those spires, hearing nothing but dust underfoot, and the whisper of space pressing gently around them. There were no markers in Schrödinger, no flags, no evidence of machines or messages, and yet it felt more alive than any place the traveler had seen. This was not a place of action, this was a place of presence, where every stone, every crevice, every glint of mineral seemed to be waiting for someone not to explore it, but simply to be with it. And then the echo came back, not from the ship, not from the systems, but from the land itself. A gentle, rhythmic pulse returned from the valley below, as if the moon were listening to its own voice bounce back across time. The ship captured it, translated, and for one breathless moment, the traveler stood at the center of an enormous echo chamber, the crater acting as an ear pressed to the deep hum of its own past. They closed their eyes. In their mind they walked the valley. The dust shimmered around them. The stone walls hummed with memory, and above the stars looked down like ancient witnesses. Time passed, slowly, gently. Eventually, Lysithea began to rise again, its systems whispering the signal of orbital departure. The valley and its shimmering dust faded into the soft gray curve of the far side's horizon. The central peaks turned to shadows, then suggestions, and then just as quietly as it had appeared, Schrödinger crater was gone. But within the traveler, it remained.
After the slow hush of Schrödinger's sacred echoes faded into the soft turning of the moon, Lysithea began to arc once more across familiar ground, though familiar meant only that Earth had seen this place. Few had truly listened to it. Now approaching from the eastern limb, the ship entered orbit over a perfect, quiet basin pressed into the northeastern quadrant of the moon's face, Mare Crisium, the Sea of Crises. But there were no crises here. From above, Mare Crisium was a near-perfect circle. Its boundaries were so smooth and even that they seemed drawn by intention, not accident. Unlike the chaotic topography of the highlands or the fractured plains of Procellarum, this mare held a serenity shaped by time and symmetry. Light touched it gently as if not to wake it too soon, and as Lysithea entered the descending path of her arc, the basin came into view in full, a great, calm bowl filled with stillness, rimmed with softened ridges like the petals of a stone flower. Inside the observation chamber, the lighting adjusted as it always did, becoming cooler now with hints of pearl and graphite tones. These matched the palette of Mare Crisium itself, whose regolith reflected light in shades of polished slate. The ship's auditory field shifted with it, introducing tones built from the region's ancient impact waves. These were long, low sounds, measured intervals like the beat of a pendulum buried in a blanket. They created not a melody but a pattern, slow and elegant, with no beginning or end, just movement, gentle, continuous, exact. The traveler leaned into the window, their forehead nearly against the curved glass. Below them, the basin glowed with a kind of quiet purpose. Its surface was smoother than most of the moon's other maria. A plain of basalt cooled so long ago that even time had learned to tiptoe across it. Scattered across the mare's interior were a few small craters, none of them deep, their rims barely interrupting the tranquility. They looked like the dimples on a sleeping face. To the west of the basin's center lay Yerkes crater, and beside it the even smaller Pierce and Picard. Not clustered, but arranged as if by design. Their shadows stretched long across the plain, reaching toward one another but never quite touching. The travelers studied their arrangement. There was something oddly calming in the geometry of it. 3 circles within a greater circle, each casting a shadow, each defined not by presence alone, but by the space around it. Lysithea came to a soft hover. The soundscape shifted subtly. The long intervals of tone deepened into what sounded almost like the breath of an immense sleeping creature. Deep inhales spaced far apart. Barely audible, more felt than heard. These were derived from tidal flexing patterns in the region. Minute changes in crustal shape caused by Earth's gravitational pull. Normally imperceptible, here they were amplified into comfort, like the moon sighing in her rest. The traveler floated back slightly, allowing the dome to expand into full projection mode. The ship began to overlay faint visual patterns into the view. A gentle mesh of golden lines, revealing the geometry of tension in the crust below. It looked like starlight woven into silk. Each stress line curved slightly, intersecting with others across the basin's floor in a subtle, spiraling design. The traveler imagined walking there barefoot and light-footed, no heavier than a feather on powder. They would step from ridge to crater, tracing these invisible lines like paths drawn in stardust. The floor of the mare would hum beneath them, not with voice but with presence. They imagined pausing at the edge of a crater, looking down, seeing not darkness but clarity. The way moonlight pooled at the bottom like still water, untouched, undisturbed. They would lie down in that light, and the moon would hold them. From Lysithea's sensors came new data, reflections of magnetic anomalies, scattered along the basin's rim. The readings translated into brief flashes of aurora-like shimmer inside the observation dome, not visible to the eye on the moon's surface, but perceptible here, as ghost light moving across the sky. These waves were gentle, pulsing every few seconds in pale turquoise and white. It was as though the mare was breathing in light from Earth, then exhaling it into space. One soft motion. Again and again, the traveler placed a hand to their chest. They could feel it now, that breath. The rhythm of something vast, not trying to speak, but simply to exist. Mare Crisium was not just a location. It was a moment stretched across stone, a poem without words, a silence so perfect it became music. The ship hovered a while longer, turning slowly so that the entire basin passed beneath. As they reached the far rim, the terrain lifted again into a ring of jagged ridges that shimmered like a crown. Light crept across them as the sun returned from its long journey, casting golden outlines across the sharp edges. But even these mountains did not disturb the peace of the mare. They seemed only to protect it. And then, something simple, something pure, a small bright object drifted slowly upward from the surface, a piece of dust lifted by the faintest trace of lunar electrostatic activity. It floated slow and sure into the airless sky. Lysithea magnified it. The traveler watched as it rose, caught Earthlight just once, flashed like a blink, then vanished into shadow. The moon turned, the ship resumed its quiet path, and Mare Crisium fell behind like a perfect thought.
As Lysithea completed another wide sweep over the moon's quiet midlands, its orbit began to curve ever so gently downward, guiding the vessel toward the moon's southern limb, where long shadows never vanish, and the airless void brushes the edge of eternity. This was the realm of perpetual twilight, a borderland of stone and shadow, where sunlight skims the surface at such a low angle that the same peaks and crater walls cast the same silhouettes for days, weeks, sometimes longer. It is a place not of endings but of endurance, and it is here, near the hidden ridges of the lunar South Pole, that Lysithea would drift into the hush of frost and the music of near silence. Below, the terrain transformed into something utterly other. Tall crater rims circled deep, ink-dark basins, some so shadowed that they had not seen direct sunlight in billions of years. These were the permanently shadowed regions, where temperatures never rose above freezing, and the faint glimmer of lunar frost traced delicate silver on stone. The land was not dead, it was sleeping, and every slope, every depression, every crumbling ridge felt like the surface of a dream, paused just before it spoke. The traveler floated toward the dome, slow and reverent. The lighting within the observation chamber dimmed to something softer than night, a blend of cold blue and pale pearl, designed to mimic the strange light below. There was no glare here, no sharpness, only a diffuse hush, as if even photons moved more gently in this part of the sky. As Lysithea drifted closer, the ship's sensors activated a special imaging suite, tuned not to brightness but to temperature, reflectivity, and micro-resonance. And suddenly, the surface below came alive with invisible light. At the heart of the view stood Shackleton Crater, nearly 20 kilometers wide, its interior hidden in unbroken shadow, its rim dusted in ancient frost. Light from Earth just barely grazed the top edges, illuminating them in a glow that shimmered more like moonlight, reflected in still water, than anything truly seen. The traveler gazed down at this quiet abyss, its floor lost in velvet darkness, and felt their own breath grow slower, deeper. They weren't looking into emptiness, they were looking into the very stillness from which dreams are born. A soft tone emerged in the chamber, no music yet, only the beginning of sound. It pulsed like a heartbeat, held just below the edge of hearing. Then came the harmony, crystalline notes, so high and sparse they felt like starlight passing through thin ice. These sounds were not created. They were revealed, drawn from micro-vibrations in the frost layers, read by the ship's thermal instruments, and rendered into tones by Lysithea's ambient system. Each ridge, each shaded patch of frost sang in its own long, trembling whisper. Together they formed a choir of sleeping silver. The traveler drifted closer to the dome, allowing the light and sound to wrap around them like a soft shawl. No motion within them now felt separate from the moon's breath. They blinked slowly, and the landscape below seemed to respond, as if their own stillness were connected to the frozen terrain. The shadows within Shackleton stirred not with movement, but with memory. For a moment, the traveler imagined something resting there, not a being, not a machine, just the shape of a deep silence, curled into itself like a sleeping animal beneath the stone. Beyond the rim, a narrow path of illumination stretched along a mountain crest, the rim of Malapert Massif, one of the tallest ridges near the pole. This peak had earned the rare distinction of being nearly sunlit at all times, a place that stood in perpetual twilight. From above, it shimmered with both frost and faint warmth. The ship's sensors translated its surface texture into a slow, layered tone, something like the echo of a harp played underwater. It filled the chamber with vibration, not volume, and the traveler could feel it press softly against their palms as they floated. Then came the dust. From the shaded edge of the nearby Svadrup crater, fine grains of ice-laced regolith began to rise, pushed by the minute forces that lived between temperature gradients and sunlight. It didn't swirl. It ascended, forming thin spirals of silver particles that reached up like smoke from an invisible flame. The traveler watched, transfixed, as these spirals caught both starlight and earthlight. They twisted upward in complete silence, dissolving into the void. And as they did, Lysithea transformed their movement into sound, soft piano-like notes, each one representing the arc, speed, and drift of a single lifted particle. The chamber filled with slow, twinkling keys,
each one spaced by long silences, like words spoken across great distances. It was the kind of sound that felt like a message, not in content, but in intention. A reminder, you are here, you are listening, and the moon remembers. The traveler turned slowly into zero gravity, letting their limbs float freely, fully open to the moment. Below, the frost gleamed along mountain walls like lacework spun from ice and moonlight. Lysithea's readings indicated buried pockets of water ice, ancient and undisturbed, some perhaps older than the Earth itself. And while science had a million questions for these places, the traveler had only one answer: silence. Not emptiness, but fullness. The kind of fullness that needs no echo. The soundscape deepened. A new chord emerged, low, rounded, slow, composed from gravitational harmonics between the moon and the distant Earth. The ship's sensors, as always, interpreted movement as The chamber responded in kind, dim pulses of light tracing circular arcs across the ceiling, like the memory of tides played on stone. And through it all, the faint shimmering of frost light and dust sound wrapped the traveler in a cocoon of slow reverie. As Lysithea began its slow ascent from the polar region, the shadows below lengthened further, and the frost grew pale and distant. The craters slipped once more into darkness, not gone, just sleeping again, untouched, unseen. The traveler remained in place, eyes closed, hearing the last of the dust chimes fade. Then, silence. No tone, no movement, just the moon and a dream, carried forward by the tide of stars.
As Lysithea ascended from the silent frost glow of the South Pole, its path curved gently toward one of the moon's most haunting thresholds. The Terminator, that ever-shifting boundary between lunar night and day. It was not a line sharp and finite. It was a gradient, a slow, measured transition where shadows stretch their longest and light tiptoes with reverence across ancient stone. Here, the world is neither fully awake nor fully at rest, and the traveler, now wrapped once more in the soft hum of the observation chamber, felt themselves enter that liminal space, not just in orbit, but in spirit. Beneath them, the moon's skin changed minute by minute. Sunlight crawled across the surface at a pace so slow it was barely perceptible, creeping over crater rims, painting long black shadows that flowed down into basins like quiet rivers. These shadows were not merely dark, they had weight, they had presence. They stretched in silence, folding over the terrain in the final moments before full illumination, creating a living artwork made of contrast, darkness in the act of surrendering to light. The Terminator revealed more than just day or night. It revealed texture. Even the smallest features on the surface, pebbles, ridges, subtle rises in dust, were pulled into relief, their forms accentuated by the angle of the light. A single boulder could cast a shadow 200 feet long. A ridge no taller than a tree could draw a line across the plain like a brushstroke on canvas. From this altitude, the landscape became a moving sculpture, its shape not only seen but felt, as though the moon were offering a touch without touching. The ship's audio interpretation system responded in kind. A new sound filled the chamber, light as wind chimes, but not random. Each chime corresponded to the angle at which sunlight first struck a feature below. As the light crept across the regolith, each activation of reflection was turned into a soft tone, higher for sharp peaks, lower for long slopes. The result was a cascading melody that moved with the shadow itself. It didn't lead or follow, it flowed. The traveler listened in stillness, heart sinking once again with the moon's slow breath. Then something shimmered, not motion, not flash, but a gleam, a delicate twinkle caught at the edge of the dome's field of view. The ship magnified it, revealing a patch of regolith that was doing something subtle but beautiful. It was glassing. In certain regions, where past impacts had melted the moon's surface into smooth, hardened plates of glass, the first light of day reflected not softly, but with a muted brilliance, like ice, just beginning to melt in the dawn. These were Vetric plains, areas where heat and force had transformed dust to clarity.
And as sunlight struck these surfaces, they responded like petals opening slowly beneath invisible water. They caught the light in arcs, reflecting it not directly, but diffusely, scattering rainbow-sharp glints in all directions. Lysithea's sensors painted the scene across the dome, and suddenly, the chamber filled with what looked like floating petals of glass. Light fragments curved like lunar orchids, drifting upward through the air in slow motion. Each piece moved with grace, responding to the ship's quiet trajectory and to the tones emerging from the surface below. They turned, shimmered, vanished, then returned, never rushing, never hurrying. The traveler reached out, letting one pass through their palm. It faded into silver as it did. Beneath them, the surface continued to brighten. The Terminator slid across the terrain like a whisper too soft to wake anything, and the shadows receded into the very formations that cast them. Crater rims were no longer sharp black arcs. They softened into form, rising like breath returning to the body. Valleys lit up in sequence, their depth revealed first by shadow, then by silver. The traveler watched as a once dark plain became a sea of quiet sheen, and still, the glass petals rose. A new layer of tone entered the room, a low harmony, warm and round. It was built from the thermal expansion of surface minerals, as they met sunlight after a long lunar night. Tiny shifts in molecular structure sent faint seismic pulses through the crust. Lysithea, as always, listened. It turned these pulses into slow, rich notes that pulsed beneath the brighter chime melody above, forming a duet between warming stone and rising light. The traveler floated nearer the dome's curve, breath slow, presence. They imagined themselves walking along the Terminator, half their body in shadow, the other bathed in gold. Each step would bring light into darkness, not like a lamp, more like a blessing. The regolith beneath their feet would sparkle just briefly, then settle again into calm. No noise, no mark, just presence. They would move slowly, perhaps kneel beside a shadowed boulder, watch as its silhouette shrank minute by minute, until the stone itself glowed like everything else. They would lie back in the dust, and watch the glass petals of light fall around them. Above, Earth hovered, pale, distant, silent. The stars turned slowly behind it, motionless in their clarity, and all the while, the moon spun on, her body carved in light and shade, her surface singing the quietest song the traveler had ever heard. The ship turned slightly, beginning its next glide. Behind it, the Terminator continued its slow passage, like a tide that never rushed, only arrived. The petals of glass faded into light, the shadows folded into day, but inside the traveler the threshold remained. Not a line between night and day, but a feeling between thought and breath, between presence and dream.
Lysithea glided onward in a soft arc, trailing through the hush left behind by the Terminator's retreat. The moon turned gently beneath her, and from the edge of Mare Imbrium, something vast and circular began to rise. A feature like a great, calm eye peering up from beneath a curtain of time. This was Plato Crater. Almost perfectly round, its floor flat and shadowed like a still lake frozen beneath the stars. The ship adjusted course, approaching with reverent slowness, and in the observation chamber, the lighting dimmed again to match the quiet shade that awaited below. From orbit, Plato was unlike any other lunar crater. Its walls, high and smooth, cast long arcs of soft gray over its darkened interior. Its floor, unusually even, held no central peak, no dramatic fractures, just gentle undulations, like ripples stilled before they began. Over billions of years, small impacts had scattered across its surface, dotting it with tiny wells of shadow, each one holding the light of stars above like ink spilled in a bowl. And so, travelers had come to call this place not just Plato, but the Sea of Well. Inside the dome, the traveler drifted forward. The view was hushed and deep, no harsh contrast, no brilliant glare. Only softness, light that slipped in from the crater rim, folding down the inner slopes like silk sliding over stone. Earth was far behind now, its glow faint. The only illumination came from the distant sun, low and slow along the horizon, and from the stars now so visible above the crater's emptiness,
that their presence felt impossibly close. Lysithea entered a hovering position just above the crater's rim. The audio systems activated gently, no melody yet, just the breath of stillness. A long, low ambient tone pulled from magnetic drift and thermal gradients in the crater walls. The moon, it seemed, was humming from within. And Plato, in its deep calm, was the chamber where that hum became pure. The traveler leaned against the dome's transparent curve. Below, they saw dozens of small craterlets on the crater floor, each no wider than a house, scattered across the dark terrain. They were not dramatic. They were quiet. Each depression collected the starlight above it, creating reflections in the absence of reflection. It was like looking down into small dry wells filled with sky. The ship magnified the view, and the chamber filled with slow shimmer. Simulated star fields, reflected in dust, projected in 3 dimensions across the dome's glass. It was as though the traveler had entered the inside of a constellation. Stars passed across their field of vision like snowflakes, moving sideways. And for a moment, they forgot whether they were looking down or looking up. A tone began, high, pure, singular. It was followed by another, lower, wider, then a third. Each tone corresponded to a specific impact site on the crater floor. The ship's harmonic mapping system had begun translating the spatial arrangement of craterlets into music. Distance became pitch, depth became resonant. The result was a constellation fugue, a slow, unfolding chord sequence that moved not in time, but in space. The notes didn't follow one another. They gathered. The traveler floated into the center of the chamber, weightless, eyes wide, and Plato surrounded them. The crater's rim glowed faintly with earthshine. Its floor remained dark, but not empty. The tiny wells scattered across its surface shimmered with the reflection of starlight filtered through lunar dust. The music, now layering itself in soft intervals, created a feeling not of ascent or descent, but of immersion. The traveler imagined walking across that basin, their feet sinking softly into dust untouched by motion for 1 billion years. Each step would echo not in sound, but in shadow. Each well of starlight they passed would shimmer just faintly as their presence moved by, acknowledging without reacting. No wind, no sound, just dust and stillness, and the weight of light. They imagined kneeling beside one of those small craterlets, peering into, and in that moment, they would see a single star reflected, its light captured in that depression of stone, not shining but resting, as if the universe had stopped to breathe. Lysithea shifted its orientation to perform a gentle orbital drift, allowing the traveler to observe Plato from all sides. The chamber dimmed further, light reduced to the barest glow, so that the star reflections inside the simulated craterlets remained visible. Above the rim, the stars moved imperceptibly, slow dancers in an invisible tide. The tones deepened, not louder, just richer. The ship had identified harmonic patterns in the craterlet spacing, mapping them into slowly repeating sequences. It was as if Plato had always been a musical instrument, one waiting for silence long enough to be played. The traveler let the sound fold around them. The chamber had vanished into glow. The view was not one of place, but of feeling. The weightless body, the dark basin, the tone of light on dust, and all of it moved in one rhythm. Pause, shimmer, pause again. At the edge of the crater, a glint. It wasn't dust this time, it was glass. From past impact melt, a patch of vitrified basalt had formed along the inner wall, moon glass. It caught sunlight just as the rim passed into day. The glint it cast moved like a shooting star, sliding slowly across the surface before vanishing. The ship's systems caught it and turned its light into sound. One final singular bell-like tone that echoed for nearly a minute. Then silence again. Lysithea lifted gently, its trajectory carrying it toward the northwest limb. Plato fell away behind them, folding back into the fabric of Mare Imbrium. The wells of starlight vanished into shadow, but inside the traveler, they remained. A field of quiet, a basin of thought, a sky held not above, but within.
As Lysithea traced a slow spiral over the eastern regions of the moon's near side, its orbit adjusted just slightly, to glide over a valley, unlike any other, the Taurus Littrow Valley, nestled between shadowed mountains and ancient landslides, shaped by time, silence, and long-forgotten fire. Here, the moon wore a different kind of stillness layered. A hush laid gently atop another, then another, until the landscape felt folded in on itself, like sheets of dusk and memory pressed flat across the stone. This was the site where humans once set foot, briefly, decades ago, and then vanished again, leaving only faint indentations in the dust and a few scattered remnants of presence. But Lysithea did not seek them. The ship came not to revisit footprints, but to listen to what the land had continued to say ever since, a slow song of rest, recovery, and returning to quiet. The traveler floated slowly forward as the landscape revealed itself. Below, the valley floor stretched like a sleeping river between two broad massifs, South Massif and North Massif, rising dramatically on either side. Their shadowed flanks caught the first edges of Earthlight, and it painted them not white, not gray, but a faint silver rose, like the blush of dawn just before thought begins. The light inside the chamber matched. Lysithea's ambient environment shifted into hues of soft pink and steel blue, the tones of a distant morning on a world that never woke. And from beneath the ship's hull came the first sounds, faint, harmonic breezes, synthesized from gravity differential measurements, over the valley. Differences so slight they became music only when translated by silence. The valley was wider than it appeared. It yawned beneath the traveler like a breath held mid-dream, cradling a plain of dust and cooled lava, streaked with rills and collapse lines, each one a record of something ancient once moving. The shadows here were long and full. They didn't hide things, they kept them. Craterlets scattered across the floor like dimples pressed into soft fabric. Slopes had given way in the distant past, leaving graceful trails of landslide debris, their paths now traced in the light. The traveler watched as a single glint flickered from near the valley center, a sliver of regolith glass, created from the intense heat of an ancient impact. Lysithea's sensors caught it just as Earthlight turned the angle, and for a moment it appeared as a soft pulse on the chamber ceiling. With it came a tone, a single descending chime, long and crystalline, fading into the backdrop like a snowflake dissolving into wind. That chime was followed by another softer, lower, then another. The ship had begun interpreting dust movement patterns, subtle swirls of fine material on the valley floor, captured by time-lapsed scanning and turned into rhythm. These particles, some untouched for millions of years, stirred only at dawn or dusk, lifted by charged fields and solar grate. And now, as the valley tilted gently into its long lunar morning, a slow drift of dust began to rise. It was not a storm, not a cloud, just a pale shimmer, lifting from the floor like mist that didn't need it. The dust grains moved in arcs, faint curves, traced along electrostatic lines invisible to any eye. Lysithea magnified the movement and projected it into the observation chamber. The traveler was suddenly surrounded by thousands of delicate flecks of white and silver, spiraling upward, looping gently, rising not in panic but in peace. They extended a hand. A flicker of a dust speck simulation passed through their fingers like a sigh. It was like trying to hold a thought before waking, something not meant to be grasped, only noticed. The sound accompanying it was now a soft blend of strings, each one barely plucked, spaced far apart as if played by moonlight itself. The scars of movement across the valley floor, trails from ancient landslides and shifting plates, were visible now in full. They were not chaotic, they were graceful. One particularly long depression curved through the eastern edge, its shadow forming a ribbon that cut across the plain, like spilled ink. The traveler imagined walking along its edge, slowly, the slope to their side rising like a wave about to free. They would touch the wall and feel warmth not from temperature, but from time. A new tone entered the chamber. It was based on magnetic echoes, subtle and uneven here, drawn from iron deposits, buried deep beneath the valley floor. These echoes were translated into sound pulses that resembled a slow heartbeat, steady, even. The ship matched it with faint ambient vibrations along the seat frames and chamber walls,
not enough to distract, only enough to feel. The traveler let their body move with it, slowly rotating, as though caught in orbit within orbit. Their breath matched the rhythm. Inhale, silence. Exhale. The valley beneath them breathed in tandem, and then as light swept fully over the valley floor, the shadows collapsed, folding back into their source, revealing the stone beneath. The moment of brightness came not like a flash, but like a soft arrival. The entire basin brightened by degrees, and every glimmer of dust reflected. The traveler watched as the ground shimmered, briefly, as though the moon had opened its eyes. No footsteps stirred this morning, no messages played on speakers, only the ship, the traveler, the sound of starlight becoming memory, and the moon turning her face toward day once more. Lysithea rose, Taurus Litro fell behind, the valley closing like a book gently laid aside, its last page still warm from the touch, and the dream deep.
At the northeastern edge of the moon's curved face, so far to the rim that it was barely visible from Earth, lay a crescent-shaped basin swaddled in mystery and shadow. Mare Humboldtianum, here, where the crust curved sharply into the sky, and then folded gently back into a broad bay of basalt and fractured stone. The moon held a place where her silence became something more. A lunar halo, formed not from light, but from the absence of everything else. As Lysithea glided slowly over the rim of this ancient feature, the landscape below seemed to curve away like the edge of a bowl filled with dusk. The mare itself was not large by lunar standards, but its placement along the limb gave it an odd, beautiful illusion, as if it floated half in space, half in the moon's own dreaming mind. The travelers, suspended weightless near the dome's arching glass, felt themselves tilt inward toward the basin, as though the moon herself had cupped her hand around this place, and whispered, "Come close." The lighting in the observation chamber dimmed to near darkness, then bloomed slowly into cool green and pale violet hues. These weren't true to the terrain, they were reflections of electromagnetic readings from the crust, translated into visual tones, to match what the eye could never see. Energy held in rock, sleep held in dust. The chamber filled with faint radial pulses, as if the land below were breathing out light in long, slow rings. The ship's harmonic system came online again, but this time the tones didn't rise or fall. They hovered, a gentle cluster of sustained notes, all hovering within the same pitch space, like chords that refuse to resolve. The source of the tones, gravity wave gradients, read from ancient fault lines beneath the mare's base. These subtle shifts in lunar mass had been there since the early crust cooled, and now, through the ship, they played like the slow ringing of a bell that had never been struck, only remembered. Below, Mare Humboldtianum unfolded like an open palm. The basalt plains inside were scattered with small craters, many of them faded, shallow, their edges blurred by layers of dust and time. The traveler peered down into one such depression, its center smooth and empty, its floor catching a curve of light, just bright enough to cast a pale semicircle across the regolith. It looked like a halo drawn into the stone, not a structure, not a trick of the eye, just light, shaped by quiet. The traveler felt their breath deepen. It was a breath that held more than air. It held pause. It held presence. Inhale, pause, exhale, drift. The moon beneath them was not moving, but she was changing, always. And here at the edge of her face, she offered not a destination, but a reflection, a mirror not of image, but of self. The ship began a slow roll, allowing the dome to pan across the far edge of the main. There, the traveler saw a gentle slope descending into the basin's rim, streaked with lavender-gray sediment and powdered glass. These materials had come from ancient impacts, molten once, then frozen into fragility, and now they gleamed beneath Earthlight in a soft swirl, like colored chalk, drawn across a canvas of silk. The ship's instruments captured the refraction angle of this moon glass, and converted it into shimmering particles across the dome. It was as though the chamber filled with crystalline feathers, drifting slowly through the space, catching light and tone with every rod. One passed near the traveler's face, a shimmer with no weight, and then dissolved back into quiet,
A new sound entered the chamber. It was composed of low lunar tides, the tug of Earth across the moon's crust at this latitude. A tone so soft it could be mistaken for memory. A note that stretched so long it could not be counted. The ship rendered it as a warm background hum, almost like a sustained breath on the rim of a clay vessel. The traveler didn't simply hear it, they became it. For a time there was no ship, no dome, no sensors, no journey, only stillness, held inside a circular mare, beneath a circling moon. The traveler imagined standing on the slope of that basin, not alone, but surrounded by nothing, and thus by everything. The sky would wrap above in velvet black. The stars would glimmer, slow and patient, and Earth would sit low, near the limb, just out of view, her light curling over the rim, like a promise never spoken. Then, as if the mare had taken a breath, a glint appeared on the far side. It wasn't from machinery, it wasn't from reflection. It was a natural lensing, where light refracted through the angled rim and struck a patch of fine crystal regolith. The effect, a thin arc of light, curving just above the basin's edge, lingering for a moment, before dissolving again. It wasn't bright, it wasn't quick, but it was complete. And Lysithea, with her infinite patience, translated that curve into sound. A falling triad, soft and harmonic, descending like petals of frost across the skin of space. Lysithea rose, Mare Humboldtianum drifted behind, but its halo remained, drawn now not in light or sound, but in the stillness left behind in the heart.
The moon turned gently once more beneath Lysithea, and in the hush that followed, an expanse opened wide, smooth and known by name, but still never truly seen this way. It was Mare Tranquillitatis, the Sea of Tranquility, a place long associated with first steps and human wonder. But here, tonight, it offered no history, no symbols, only quiet, vast, layered quiet. The kind that settles slowly over the skin like soft silk, like wind that never stirs air. Only time. From above, the mare was immense and graceful, a plain of ancient basalt, stretching outward in soft waves, framed by subtle crater rims and distant mountain shadows. No drama, no announcement, just immensity worn down to perfection. The traveler floated into the center of the observation dome, eyes wide but relaxed, limbs loose, body synchronized with the moon's rhythm. Their breath, steady now, aligned with the silence below. The ship descended slightly, allowing for a better view. The sunlight was just beginning to reach the far eastern edge of the mare, and from this altitude, the light moved not like daybreak, but like a veil spilling across the ground in slow motion, brushing gently over ridges and tiny depressions. The edge of the light was not sharp. It was soft, diffused by dust particles, just beginning to stir. Not in clouds, not in gusts, in arcs, slow, shimmering arcs that caught the early rays and turned them to glow. Inside the chamber, the ambient lights followed suit. Pale gold, silver gray, and pastel ivory bloomed softly across the walls, mimicking the angles of the landscape. Lysithea's audio sensors interpreted the thermal response of the ground, how quickly the regolith absorbed the growing warmth of the sun, and translated that data into long harmonic hums, slow drones that rose and fell in overlapping circles. The effect was like standing inside a bell that had been rung once, very softly, and had not stopped ringing since. Below, faint shadows stretched across the mare like sleep lines pressed into fabric. The traveler watched as they moved, not like shapes being pulled away, but like memories fading gently from the edge of thought. The light uncovered not just craters but subtle flow lines, ridges left behind by ancient lava as it cooled into permanent stillness. These flows curled and curled, forming spirals so faint they were only visible under very shallow light. But here, from orbit, with Earth's reflection and the earliest sun combined, they danced into view. A soft sound emerged in the dome. This one was different, not a tone or drone, but a wind-like shimmer. Yet it was not caused by atmosphere. It was drawn from slight, repeated electrostatic lifts in the dust field, grains rising a few centimeters before falling again,
stirred by temperature changes. The ship mapped the frequencies of those movements and rendered them as a sound like sand slipping down glass. The traveler blinked slowly, utterly still. They imagined walking there, not to explore, not to claim, but to rest. Their feet would press softly into the warm upper crust of the mare, toes sinking into stone powder. Each step would carry silence. Each breath would fill with something beyond oxygen, something like presence, like stillness made real. They would find a place to sit, a low rise along the rim of a shallow crater, and from there look out, not to see, but to be seen, by the moon, by the sea of light, by everything that was. From the dome, the ship projected a wide halo of faint projections into the chamber, visual traces of solar angle versus reflectivity across the entire mare. The floor came alive with a slow turning spiral, showing how light touched the plane in delicate sequence, like fingers running across piano keys, not to play a song but to feel the wood. The traveler lowered themselves into the spiral's center and let it turn around them. Each shift in the spiral pattern triggered a tone, each tone lingered, and slowly, they wove together into something not quite song, not quite silence. Still wind, the ship called it. The Sea of Tranquility wasn't just a name, it was a condition, a way of being. The traveler opened their eyes. Far below, a single gleam appeared on the mare's western edge, a ridge perhaps, catching light just so. It shone for barely a second, then vanished, as if the moon had blinked. The ship noted the glint and converted it into a pulse of chorded resonance, like a harp touched beneath water. That tone echoed through the chamber and then dissolved into the hum that had never left. And the stars, oh, the stars. From this vantage they were still visible beyond the edge of the dome, sharp, radiant, silent. The mare below glowed faintly, but it never drowned them. Instead, the stars leaned inward, as if to listen, or perhaps to hum along. Lysithea turned. The Sea of Tranquility passed slowly behind, fading not into distance, but into integration. It had been seen, it had been heard, and now it was part of the traveler. A sea with no waves, a wind with no weight, a song with no words, and the dream continued, slower still.
Beyond the smooth vastness of Mare Tranquillitatis, the moon began to shift once more, her terrain becoming less sea, more seam. As Lysithea adjusted her orbit eastward, she approached a place not marked by plains or peaks, but by rupture. A line cut into the lunar surface so straight, so deep, and so improbable that it seemed drawn by something not of nature, yet made entirely by time and silence. This was Rima Ariadaeus, a sinuous ancient rille, stretching more than 300 kilometers across the moon's surface, like a silver scar written in slow motion. From above, the rille appeared as a narrow canyon, carved deep into the regolith. Its edges were sharp but softened by dust, and in some places small collapsed pits lined its path like beads on a string. It wasn't just a valley, it was a fold, a great wound in the moon's crust, opened by long-past tectonic breath, then sealed again with dust and light. The traveler floated forward into the dome, eyes narrowing in gentle awe. The observation chamber dimmed into midnight tones, charcoal, ash gray, with hints of silver dust projected across the upper arc of the dome. The ship's orientation shifted to a glide parallel to the rille, letting the traveler observe its depth, its length, and the strange music that emanated from its geological silence. Lysithea's sensors registered subtle gravitational variations along the length of the rille, slight dips and rises in lunar density. These variations were rendered into sound, a low, plucked resonance, like a single string pulled slowly and let go, again and again. Each note was spaced by silence. Each tone was a crack remembered, a breath of tectonic memory whispered back to the surface. Beneath them, shadows pooled inside the rille like spilled ink. Light from Earth skimmed across the upper ridges but never reached the bottom. The traveler gazed into that long, winding shadow and felt something stir, not fear, not awe, but recognition. This was a place that had opened once, long ago,
and then held its opening, not closed, not healed, just present. They imagined descending into it, not with speed, not with purpose, but with care. Their steps would displace only dust. Their body would feel the pull of stone to either side. In the bottom of the rill, they would lie back, eyes tracing the razor-thin strip of stars visible above, framed by walls of silence. They would feel cradled by the moon's fraction. The ship's internal visualization system activated then, overlaying a transparent simulation of the rill's subsurface structure, revealing what lay hidden beneath faults, channels and hollow voids, formed by the ancient release of stress. These structures curved and twisted beneath the visible valley, like the roots of a tree no longer standing. The chamber lit up with arc lines of pale gold, curving through the space like flowing calligraphy. The soundscape followed. A new tone entered, slender, high and trembling, like glass drawn along the edge of a table. These were the harmonics of fracture propagation, mapped from the physical shape of the underlying faults. The sound was neither happy nor mournful. It was patient, and it unfolded like lace, patterned, fragile, intricate. The traveler drifted near the dome's edge, eyes tracing the rill's path. Beneath them, the moon offered a narrative, written not in symbols, but in continuity. The rill began in Mare Tranquillitatis, and stretched west toward Mare Vaporum, a continuous thought etched in basalt. Its existence was a reminder. Not all cracks mean brokenness. Some are the result of growth, of unfolding, of space making room for silence. The stars above turned slowly. The earth, now far behind the moon's horizon, no longer offered reflected light. Only the soft gleam of indirect starlight touched the surface. And yet, the shadows within the rill seemed to hold their own luminescence. Not brightness, but presence. A darkness that wasn't empty but full of held sound, full of still time. The traveler closed their eyes for a moment. In their mind they walked the length of the rill from end to end, not quickly, not to arrive, but to accompany. With each imagined step, the canyon seemed to change shape, widening, narrowing, curving gently, then cutting straight like a quiet decision. They placed their hand on the wall. They felt the heat of stored sunlight, the cool of long night. They felt stillness folded into stillness. Back in the chamber, Lysithea adjusted again, tilting upward to offer a final full view of the rill before its curvature vanished behind the limb. The projection shifted once more, the rill now a single, glowing line of light, stretching across the dome's arc like a line of starlight, fallen gently across an ancient canvas. The final tones rang out, drawn from the magnetic tremor maps of the region. The last sounds were 3 notes, spaced widely apart, each one echoing a section of the rill's history. The opening, the settling, the stillness. They rang into the chamber like ripples moving backward through time. Then came quiet, not absent, just the kind of quiet that contains everything. Lysithea rose, curving her way back toward open plain. Behind her, the rill stretched on, not forgotten, but remembered now in tone and breath. The moon exhaled, the dream undisturbed deepened.
Lysithea had made her way around the moon so many times now, drifting not with propulsion but with intention, gliding through orbits shaped by silence, dancing in slow cadence with light and dust. The traveler had seen craters filled with stars, valleys lined in frost, oceans of stone that hummed with patience, and shadows that folded around time like lullabies. And now, she drifted toward the final arc of the journey. Below, the moon remained steady, her surface unchanged, her breath unbroken. She held no climax, no finale, only continuation. In the distance, Earth had risen once more, its glowing arc turning soft blue against the black canvas of space. The moon did not look back at it. She did not long for it. She simply held its light, reflected it gently, and let it pass. The ship's systems dimmed for the final time. Inside the observation chamber, the lights eased into soft warmth, shades of candlelight, of dusk, of memory. The soundscape too faded from notes to textures, a low, calming hum, like cloth sliding over stone,
like breath falling into breath. The traveler floated motionless, eyes half closed, their body wrapped in a serenity that could only be earned by hours of stillness among stars. Lysithea played no anthem here, no signal to say, "We're done." She only shifted into a coasting glide, her engines quiet, her wings of metal stretched open like the limbs of a dreaming bird. The traveler smiled softly. Their journey wasn't ending, it was becoming. And so, in the final stretch of this 4-hour drift through space and shadow, there was only this: a ship quiet as a sigh, a moon cradling light and silence, a soul rocked into peace by stars and dust. No need for words anymore, no need for thought. May the stillness of lunar dust, the hush of distant stars, and the slow, silver hum of the cosmos stay with you long after this dream fades. Sleep well.